Hephaestus, the blacksmith god. Prologue. In the vast pantheon of the Olympian gods, where beauty, power, and perfection seem to be immutable norms, a special figure crosses the ages with a different light, that of Hephaestus, the god of fire, blacksmithing, and divine creation. Born of suffering and rejection, Hephaestus is the symbol of the contrasts that define not only the world of myths, but also human nature itself. Although he does not appear as a tall and shining god, with ideal features, Hephaestus carries with him a unique gift, the power to transform raw material into objects full of life, beauty, and magic. He is not a warrior armed with brute force, but a creator whose tools, forged in the eternal fire of the volcano, give shape to divine power. Under his hammer, metal acquires voice and meaning, weapons that conquer, shields that defend, jewels that fascinate, machines that come to life. The birth and life of Hephaestus are marked by a powerful contradiction. He is the crippled god, cast from Olympus by his mother, Hera, out of shame for his deformity, but he is also the most skilled of the gods. This physical marginalization also makes him a figure full of humanity, a mirror of the suffering and struggle that characterize the existence of mortals. He is not just a god, but a symbol of the transformative power of work, of the genius that emerges from trials and shortcomings. Hephaestus is not just a craftsman. He is the bridge between the divine and the human, between the sacred fire of creation and the raw material of the world. In the myths that surround him, fire is not only a destructive element, but also a generator, purifier, source of innovation. He represents the creative spirit that overcomes adversity, and his underground workshop is a sanctuary of transformation and rebirth. Thus, Hephaestus is more than the god of fire. He is the archetype of the creator who shapes the world with his hands, the maker of a world in which beauty is born from fire and from fire hope is born. Through him, we understand that suffering and imperfection are not obstacles, but the beginning of any true creation, of any great destiny. Contents. Chapter 1. The Divine Origin of Hephaestus. Chapter 2. The Marriage with Aphrodite. Chapter 3. Hephaestus and the Sacred Fire. Chapter 4. Erichthonius, the Motherless Son. Chapter 5. The Rivalry with Ares. Chapter 1. The Divine Origin of Hephaestus. In the complex and sometimes contradictory pantheon of Greek mythology, the birth of Hephaestus occupies a special place, being shrouded in divine symbolism and drama. The son of Hera, the queen of the gods, Hephaestus is not just a simple product of a union between the gods, but the result of a decision full of pride, anger, and rebellion. His origin reflects not only the myth of a divine birth, but also the turmoil of a goddess wounded in pride and jealousy. According to one of the best-known versions of the myth, Hephaestus was born without the intervention of Zeus. Hera, humiliated and furious after Zeus brought Athena into the world without a mother, directly from his forehead, a symbol of pure reason and male superiority, she decided to take revenge. Wanting to prove that she too could create life without a man, Hera conceived and gave birth to Hephaestus alone. Thus, he is not only a divine son, but a symbol of maternal pride and the claim of the creative power of women. However, in this creation born of rebellion and suffering, the myth introduces a tragic nuance. Hephaestus was born deformed. Unlike the other Olympian gods, perfect in their beauty and physical harmony, he was crippled, lame, and in some versions, even hideous in appearance. This deformity is interpreted by some ancient authors as a cruel irony of fate. Hera, in an attempt to demonstrate her creative independence, gave birth to an imperfect child. Another version suggests that the deformity Hephaestus appeared after being thrown from Mount Olympus, but it remains clear that his appearance into the world was not received with joy. Symbolically, his unusual birth places Hephaestus in a marginal position from the first moment of his existence. Although he is born of the gods, he is not accepted by them. Although he is part of the Olympian family, he is rejected and thrown, both literally and metaphorically, outside the perfect circle of divinity. This act of exclusion represents not only Hephaestus's personal drama, but also the beginning of a unique existential trajectory among the gods, that of the isolated creator, of the brilliant artist born of suffering and marginalization. And some alternative myths, Zeus is considered the father of Hephaestus, but these versions do not change the deeply symbolic nature of his birth. The fact that Hera is the dominant figure in the act of creation remains constant, outlining a goddess with pride, suffering and human reactions, and a world of men, where Zeus, Poseidon and Hades dominate the sky, the sea and the underworld. Hera tries to assert her power through a creative gesture, but is punished by a motherhood marked by shame and rejection. This early scene of Hephaestus' life is essential for understanding his entire myth. It is not just a simple story about the origin of a god, but a parable about imperfection, about how beauty does not guarantee acceptance, and genius can be born from deep humility. Hephaestus is a different god from the moment of birth. He does not shine through beauty, but through what he creates. In a mythology where goddesses give birth out of desire, out of love, or through natural forces, the birth of Hephaestus is a rational creation, motivated by jealousy and ambition. Hera does not. He wanted a child, but a victory. But in return he received a painful lesson about the limits of will and the unpredictability of divine destiny. Thus, the origin of Hephaestus is not only a mythological episode, but also a profound meditation on the condition of creation. That not everything that is created with great intentions comes out perfect, that beauty is not always external, and that true value is not seen at the first moment, but is proven over time, through action, through talent, through the inner fire of transformation. And the Greek mythological universe, where goddesses give birth to perfect and luminous gods, and the children of the gods are endowed with great powers and unearthly beauty. The story of Hephaestus' birth stands out with a serious, tragic and disturbing note. He is not a story of the triumph of life, but one of shame, abandonment and suffering, a beginning marked by imperfection and rejection. Hephaestus was born, as he says myth, following an impulsive and arrogant decision by Hera. Wounded in her pride as a woman and queen of the heavens, Hera wanted to prove to Zeus that she could give birth without a man in a world dominated by male power. She wanted to create a child on her own, to give life through the force of her own will. But nature, whether divine or mortal, does not forgive pride taken to the extreme. Thus, from this birth came not a glorious child, but a different one, Hephaestus, the god who would become the craftsman of Olympus, but who at first was only Hera's shameful monster, on the day of his birth. The myth says that Hera looked at the baby and was overcome with fear and disgust. Hephaestus was not beautiful. His body was deformed, his legs were twisted, his gait uncontrolled. He resembled neither his Olympian brothers, nor the image of perfection divine. In a moment of weakness and shame, Hera took the child and threw him from Mount Olympus into the sea. This act was not just an act of physical rejection, but a symbolic condemnation. Hephaestus was removed from the ranks of the gods, excluded from the divine family, banished from the heavenly light into the depths of the world. This throwing is not a simple gesture of impulse.He is a powerful image of the harshness of the divine world, a world in which imperfection is not tolerated even by his own mother. Hephaestus falls for a day and a night through the heavens of the world, and at the end of the fall he reaches the sea, where he is saved by the sea nymphs, Tethys and Eurynome, who receive him and raise him in secret, in an underwater cave. Without them, the god would probably have perished, because Olympus no longer cared about his fate. But the fall did not leave him unharmed. It is said that his disability was aggravated by the impact with the earth or the waves. Whether he was born crippled, or became so after the fall, Hephaestus forever remains the god with a crippled, lame body, who cannot move like the other gods. And in this difference begins to build a special identity, one of the marginal, banished, but not destroyed. Hera's rejection has several layers. First, it is maternal shame, the shame of having brought into the world something that does not respect the divine standard of beauty. In Greek mythology, beauty is almost a form of power. Aphrodite seduces with it, Apollo imposes with its brilliance, Athena fascinates with dignity and balance. Hephaestus possesses none of these external attributes. And secondly, it is also a refusal of responsibility. Hera does not assume her creation. She renounces him. She throws him, literally and symbolically, out of her existence. This part of the myth says a lot about the Greek conception of suffering, disability and marginality. In a culture that valued harmony, proportion, balance and strength, Hephaestus is an anomaly. But it is also the beginning of a mythical lesson about the fact that power is not only in physical beauty. Even if the beginning of Hephaestus is a tragedy, his story will become a demonstration of the fact that genius and creativity can arise from the darkest suffering. Seen in a symbolic way, Hephaestus is the image of the rejected child, the different man, the individual, who does not fit into the accepted patterns of society. It is that other that arouses misunderstanding, pity or fear. But what saves him is not the mercy of the gods, but the inner power to transform pain into art, shame into strength, isolation into a workshop of creation. The years spent in the sea cave, far from Olympus, were not wasted years. And the absence of his mother, Hephaestus learned the craft and the silence of the deep. He began to shape metal, melt bronze, beat gold and master fire. He learned to create with his hands what the other gods had from birth: beauty, perfection, balance. They were not given to him. He had to forge them himself. The fall of Hephaestus can also be seen as an archetype of the fall into the world, an expulsion from the Olympian paradise, followed by an initiation into pain and work. That he is, in a profound sense, a version divine form of what in religions or literature is called the exile from the Garden of Eden, the expulsion from the light, to know the hard reality of existence. But in that exile, Hephaestus does not die. On the contrary, he is reborn in another form, that of the creator god, the only one who knows the art of transforming matter. In Greek mythology, there is no god more human than Hephaestus. His deformed birth, maternal rejection, his painful fall and his subsequent recovery are all deeply human traits. He is not a god of the sky, of lightning or of war, but a god of the workshop, of the domestic fire, of creation through toil. He is the one who gives shape to the divine world, without being fully accepted by it. Rejection at birth is the beginning of a life of conflict, but also of meaning. In contrast to the other gods, who dominate through strength or brilliance, Hephaestus will win respect not through appearance, but through utility. And this is perhaps the most beautiful revenge of a rejected god, to become indispensable even to those who cast him out. Thus, birth and rejection are not just simple mythological episodes. They are the key to understanding a unique destiny among the gods. Hephaestus is not just a tragic figure, but a symbol of the hidden potential in those who are marginalized. What seems weak or ugly at first can become, through work and patience, one of the greatest forces in the world. And perhaps in each of us lives, in a smaller or larger form, a Hephaestus. A part that was not accepted, a pain we carry, a voice we were forced to suppress. But like him, we can learn to transform that pain into creation, that rejection into power, that fall on the path to greatness. After the brutal expulsion from Mount Olympus, the body of the young Hephaestus crossed the heavens. Like a shooting star, carried by the cold winds of the divine heights. The fall was long, painful and hopeless, in a world where the gods enjoyed immortality, beauty and prestige. He, the rejected child, seemed destined for oblivion. However, the myth teaches us that in the deepest abysses can ignite the most unexpected lights. And in the case of Hephaestus, salvation did not come from the heavens, but from the sea. While his body, crushed by the fall, sank into the salty waters of the sea, two beings spotted him, moved by pity that not even his own mother had felt, the nymphs Tethys and Eurynome. These marine spirits, gentle and protective beings, decided to save him. With their grace and power, they carried him into the depths, to a cave hidden beneath the waves, far from the curious or contemptuous gaze of Olympus. The underwater cave in which Hephaestus was raised by the nymphs was not just a simple physical shelter. He represented, in essence, a mythological matrix, a space of spiritual gestation, a laboratory of becoming. There, in that isolated realm, without heavenly light, without the approval of the gods, Hephaestus was free to be himself. Free from shame, from the Olympian judgment, from the critical glances that drove him away. He was a place outside of time and divine rules, where the beat of the waves merged with the new rhythm of a life started from scratch. The nymphs, although they did not have the powerful status of the goddesses on Olympus, were the ones who offered more than any other. Divinity, gentleness, patience, maternal love. Eurynome, goddess of cosmic order and balance, together with Tethys, the great mother of the waters, became symbols of regenerative femininity. In their arms, Hephaestus was not a monster, but a wounded child. He was not a crippled god, but a soul with potential. He was their son in the deepest sense, not of blood, but of destiny. The years spent in the underwater cave were, for Hephaestus, a period of creative solitude, and this a damp, cold and silent space, where the sun's rays penetrated diffusely through the blue waves. He found his vocation. Perhaps his body did not allow him to run or fight like the other gods, but his mind was alive, inquisitive. And his hands, although thick and heavy, had a magical skill. There, in secret, Hephaestus began to discover the art of fire and metal. He learned how to melt bronze, forge iron, and shape gold into astonishing shapes. He understood that, although he himself had been unaccepted by the gods, he could create objects that would attract their admiration. He could give shape to beauty, even if he did not possess it in his own image. Legends say that, during that period, he created his first masterpieces, divine jewels for Tethys and Eurynome, with such fine and harmonious details that no other craftsman, not even from Olympus, could equal them. It is said that his bracelets and necklaces reflected not only the beauty of the material, but also the deep melancholy of his soul. Each creation was a silent prayer, a claim for meaning, a gesture of resistance in the face of an unjust fate. This period of formation and isolation was essential for defining Hephaestus not only as a god of fire and craft, but as the archetype of the self-taught creator. Unlike the other gods, who received their attributes from birth or through inheritance, Hephaestus had to build them. He did not receive a kingdom like Poseidon, nor the lightning of Zeus, nor the wisdom of Athena. All he had was his will. And his talent grew in silence in the darkness, like a flame that flickers weakly but stubbornly. The underwater cave can also be read as a metaphor for the subconscious, the place where, far from the world visible, the individual rebuilds himself. It is a space of silent regeneration. If Olympus belongs to the day, then the cave belongs to the night. Here, in the fertile darkness, Hephaestus learned not only to create, but also to forgive. Although betrayed by his mother, he did not cultivate hatred, but skill. Although banished by the gods, he did not desire revenge, but affirmation. It is important to note that this marine space, which in the myths of other gods would be a place of punishment or death, becomes a sanctuary for Hephaestus. The fall into the depths does not destroy him, but strengthens him, and the silence of the oceans, he transforms. It is a narrative of alchemy. Pain becomes art. The wound becomes power. Rejection becomes a source of knowledge. Paradoxically, the more he was rejected, the more capable he became of creating something worthy of love. The time spent in the underwater shelter of was also a formative stage moral. He taught Hephaestus patience, humility, but also the value of his own work. Each object he created was a silent response to the silence of those who ignored him. Each work was a declaration, I exist, and I exist through what I create. It is, after all, the same lesson that the great artists and inventors of humanity have offered throughout history. You don't always have to be accepted to matter. You just have to create something impossible to ignore. One day, Hephaestus will leave that cave. He will surface and demand to be seen. He will win the respect and admiration of even those who rejected him. But everything he will become will be due to that period of creative darkness, spent in the protective arms of the two nymphs and a world that banished him. They offered him a space to become. And the cave was not a prison, but a sacred workshop. Thus, the underwater shelter becomes a mythological lesson of extraordinary depth. Before man or God can take on his mission, he must find his place of silence and formation. Every fall must be followed by a moment of retreat, of introspection. Every exile can be a gateway to rebirth. And for Hephaestus, that dark place beneath the waves was the beginning of a greatness that even Olympus did not find it easy to recognize her. Alone, in the silent depths of the earth and the sea, Hephaestus began to create. The world did not seek him, did not call him. But he no longer needed recognition. He had found his mission. A mission that was not born of glory, but of fire. A deep cave, hidden from the eyes of gods and mortals, he built a workshop. There, in that sanctuary of metal and will, an art was born that until then did not exist either on earth or on Olympus. Hephaestus was not only the first blacksmith among the gods, but also the first creator in the profound sense. Not just a craftsman, but a demiurge. When he first raised his hammer and let it fall on the anvil, it was not a simple gesture of work, it was the beginning of a civilization. Until then, the gods ruled, but did not build. They shared lightning and fate, but they did not know the secret of the fusion of matter and spirit. Hephaestus was the one who discovered that fire is not only destruction, but also birth, and that hidden forge, the echo of his beats became the rhythm of a new creation. Fire, a symbol of purification and transformation, was controlled not for war, but for beauty, for functionality, for the miraculous. The molten metal became soft as clay in his hands. Gold and silver flowed like rivers, and from them arose objects that neither god nor mortal had ever seen. Shields that could not be pierced, cups that filled themselves, brooches that came to life, bronze birds that sang. It is said that Hephaestus not only processed metal, but also listened to it. Each blow of the hammer was a dialogue between God and matter. He felt the vibration of each element. He knew when to cool it and when to heat it. He did not learn from books, but directly from the forces of the world. It was a knowledge born of practice, pain and perseverance, an intuitive science of the inner fire. His first great mythical workshop is described as being located deep in the heart of a volcano. Later, in the Roman tradition, this place becomes Etna, the holy mountain of fire, whose rumbles are not thunder, but the blows of Hephaestus' hammer. The image is disturbing. A lame god, banished by the gods, who creates beauty from the inner fire of the earth. From that moment on, the volcano ceases to be just a manifestation of geological fury, it becomes an altar of divine art. The art of Hephaestus' blacksmithing was a revelation. Through him craftsmanship became sacred, and no other god had ever offered the world such a profoundly transformative ability. The gods had innate powers, he created his power from toil. And through this, he forever changed the relationship between the gods and the world. He was no longer just about magic or divine will, but about work, about process, about respect for matter. The objects he created had life and meaning. We talk about the solar chariot of Helios, built by the hand of Hephaestus. About the gold and bronze palaces erected for the gods of Olympus. About Aphrodite's unique jewelry, which made her even more irresistible. But perhaps the most famous of all are the weapons of heroes and gods. The armor of Achilles, the helmet of Hermes, the scepter of Zeus. All were forged in his workshop. His objects were not only beautiful, but they carried within them a part of the suffering, patience and inner fire of the Creator. It is essential to understand that Hephaestus was not just a craftsman, he was a metal magician. He created magical objects, not through incantations, but through the perfection of technique. A time when divinity was often seen as distancing himself from work. He was the god who got his hands dirty, who worked, who hammered iron with sweat and soul. He did not speak in parables. He did not command armies, but worked alone in front of the fire. In many ways, he is the prototype of the brilliant, unjust, but essential craftsman. He symbolizes the artist who, although he is not admired for his beauty, conquers the world through what he creates. His art is not just expression, it is salvation. It is the only way he could respond to his suffering. Where other gods howled and destroyed, he shaped, polished, and ennobled. He the same time. His forge becomes the place where matter is spiritualized. Metal, normally hard and cold, acquires warmth, form, and meaning. He is a poetic vision of creation. Matter is not inferior to spirit, but can be ennobled through art. This conception will later resonate in ancient philosophies, in alchemy, in art, and even in modern science. Hephaestus is, in myth, the origin of this idea. It is also interesting that, although he worked alone, he was sometimes helped by automatic creatures. Golden women with souls, tripods that walked alone, metal arms that held his tools. He was a precursor of the engineer, the inventor, the technological dreamer. What for the gods was magic, for him was science and precision. And the Greek world, dominated by aesthetic ideals and harmony, Hephaestus brought the idea that beauty can also come from functionality. Moreover, through his art, he defeated one of the greatest fears of the ancient world, chaos. His creation imposes order in a disordered world. His fire does not burn randomly, but is directed. Metal does not melt meaninglessly, but is transformed. In this sense, Hephaestus becomes a civilizer. Through his tools, through his weapons and jewelry, gods and mortals begin to build, to beautify, to organize. Thus, the art of divine blacksmithing is not just a mythical skill, but a philosophy of life. Hephaestus teaches us that, from isolation and suffering, a creative force can emerge that changes the world. That you don't need applause to create something important. That sometimes, in the silence of the workshop, in front of a hot anvil, part of the history of the universe is written. And even if Olympus took time to understand its value, one day, the entire world, from gods to mortals, will carry, admire, and depend on its creations. Because in the end, Hephaestus' fire does not consume, it gives life. The wounds of childhood do not disappear with the passage of time. They deepen in silence, shaping the soul into shapes that are difficult to notice, but impossible to remove. Hephaestus, raised far from Olympus, in the dark depths of the sea and then in the fire of the mountains, never forgot the moment when his own mother threw him into the void. He did not forget the look of contempt, nor the fact that he had been considered unworthy to live among the gods only because he did not meet their ideal of beauty. In his heart, the fire of creation burned alongside a silent and deep flame, the desire to be recognized, but also the need for justice. Hephaestus was not vengeful in the classical sense of the Greek gods. He did not curse, he did not call storms, he expressed his will through metal, through art, through precision. So, when he decided to respond to Hera's gesture, he did not do it with hatred, but with a cold and ingenious intelligence. Years in isolation taught him that the most powerful weapon is not brute force, but patience. And when patience is allied with talent, things are born that can humiliate even a goddess. Hephaestus created a throne. But not just any throne, but a true monument to his craft. Made of shining gold, adorned with precious stones, decorated with fine filigree and cosmic motifs, The throne seemed a divine offering. In appearance, it was a masterpiece worthy of the Queen of Heaven. In reality, it was a trap. He sent this throne to Mount Olympus as a gift for Hera, a gift that seemed like a proof of reconciliation, a manifestation of filial love and recognition of maternal authority. The goddess, flattered by the beauty of the object and without suspecting any hidden intention, accepted the gift. She sat down on the throne. And the moment she did, invisible mechanisms were activated. Gold chains wrapped around her wrists, the arms of the throne tightened, the backrest arched. Hera was trapped, immobilized, unable to rise or escape. The throne was not just a chair, it was a lesson. Hephaestus was showing her that what had been considered weak, deformed and worthless now had the power to control. He, the abandoned child, was chaining his mother with his own hands, but not through brutality, but through ingenuity. It was the craftsman's revenge against the goddess.A. Revenge of the mind on contempt. Olympus was shaken. The other gods gathered around Hera, trying to free her, but none of them succeeded. The chains were invisibly fine, but impossible to break. What had been created in the silence of the forge could not be undone by force. It was necessary to finally recognize the value of Hephaestus. Only he had the key, only he could undo what he himself had forged. Without him, the Queen the Heavens remained a prisoner. It is at this moment in the myth that a profound symbolic reversal occurs. The deformed god, the ignored one, becomes indispensable. From the edge of mythology, he ascends to its center. What had been the shame of Olympus becomes the key to its balance. The gods, aware that they could not force him, sent messengers, offered gifts, promised forgiveness. But Hephaestus was in no hurry. He finally knew that he was no longer a simple exile. Now he could negotiate. And finally, he asked for what he had always been denied: recognition and belonging. In some versions of the myth, Hephaestus asks that Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, be offered to him as his wife, a paradoxical request, the ugliest of the gods uniting with the most beautiful, but also symbolic. Creation and beauty, an impossible but revealing couple. In other versions, the simple reacceptance on Olympus is enough. In all, however, the essence remains. Hera, the goddess who threw him away, ends up depending on the rejected one. The circle closes. Hephaestus finally agrees to free her. Not with contempt, not with pride, but with lucidity. His gesture is not pure revenge, but an act of symbolic justice. He does not want destruction, but balance. He does not want to defeat Hera, but to show her that even the unwanted can have power, and that beauty is not the only criterion of value. This mythological episode is one of the most powerful in all of Greek mythology. Not for its external drama, but for its internal depth. In it, universal themes are played out: abandonment, recognition, revenge, and forgiveness. Hephaestus does not rise up against his mother because he hates her, but because he wants to show her that her mistake was a profound one. He does not overthrow the hierarchy of the gods, but subtly rewrites it. He introduces a new paradigm. Power does not lie only in strength or beauty, but also in intelligence, work, and resilience. To Hephaestus, revenge against Hera is, in fact, the moment when the god conquers his place on Olympus. Not through blood, but through art. Not through hatred, but through creation.He is the profoundly human lesson that the marginalized can become essential, because rejection does not nullify value, but rather sharpens it. And Hera? She is not destroyed, but she is changed. In a myth where goddesses rarely admit their mistakes, Hera is forced into introspection.He is not known whether she ever asks for forgiveness. But the fact that, after this episode, Hephaestus remains on Olympus, respected and appreciated, says it all. Hephaestus' revenge is not just an act of personal balancing. He is a mythological statement about the role of the creator in a world that values appearances. He is the victory of art over contempt. And it is the beginning of a new stage in his life, the stage in which, at last, his inner fire is recognized as sacred. In the clear sky of myth, a rare image rises. Not a god riding a fiery chariot, not a goddess floating on a shell, but a craftsman, lame, unadorned, but with a will of granite, climbing slowly towards the place from which he had once been banished. He was Hephaestus, the renegade son of Hera, returned to Mount Olympus not as a prisoner, not as a beggar, but as the master of his own destiny. So silent had been his revenge that even the gods had begun to understand that they were not in front of a simple craftsman, but of a creator of realities. Following his subtle triumph over Hera, Hephaestus was no longer just a strange and tolerated presence. He had become indispensable. But the return to Olympus was not a short road. It was not climbed in a day, and it was not a simple physical climb, but a symbolic one. The climb of the one who had fallen, the climb of the one who had been rejected. It was not just about moving from one place to another, but about reintegration, about acceptance, about a new order in the celestial hierarchy. Legend has it that, in order to return among the gods, Hephaestus was brought by Dionysus, the god of wine, sacred madness and liberation. A scene full of contrast and beauty. Hephaestus climbs Mount Olympus drunk, laughing, carried on a mule, accompanied by dancing, singing and debauchery, not as a triumphant god, but as a forgiven artist, brought back by another. Marginal. Dionysus, himself an ambivalent figure in the pantheon, understood the pain of exclusion and perhaps, better than anyone, the beauty of creative chaos. This carnivalesque return has profound symbolism. Hephaestus is not reaccepted on Olympus through pride or revenge, but through a reversal of order, a world in which the rejected becomes essential, and the rigid divine hierarchy is loosened for a moment in favor of the creative spirit. It is a mythical lesson about openness, about reconnecting, about accepting difference. Once on Olympus, Hephaestus asked for nothing, but received everything. He did not claim thrones, he did not ask to be the god of war or lightning. He only asked for a workshop, a place to create. And there, in his palace of bronze and gold, one of the greatest forges in all of mythology arose. A space where divine fire and technical art met, where the sound of the hammer became heavenly music, where matter took on soul. For the other gods, Hephaestus' return was, at first, an act of compromise. But it soon turned into a revelation. He was the only one who could build with precision, the only one who could repair Zeus's lightning bolts, who could create Hera's ornaments, who could imagine tools and weapons that surpassed even magic. When Apollo sang, when Ares went to battle, or when Artemis hunted, Their instruments bore the signature of Hephaestus. He was not at the center of the action, but every action passed through his hands. Despite his disability, or perhaps because of it, Hephaestus had a different vision of power. He did not seek dominance, but construction. He did not fight for control, but for form, function, and harmony. This was his paradox: a god of fire who did not burn, but created; a god of metal who did not destroy, but gave life. In his new Olympian life, his relationship with Hera changed. He was no longer the mother who judged, but the goddess who asked for her son's help. It is said that, secretly, Hera began to admire his silent strength. It was not love in the human sense, but a form of respect born of recognition of value. Hephaestus did not apologize for what he had done, but neither did he ask for an explanation for what he had suffered. His forgiveness was not declared, but embodied, through the acceptance of his new role, through the ability to move on. Some say that Zeus himself, despite his pride, looked at him with a form of envy, not for his beauty or strength, but for the rarity of a skill that not even the king of the gods had. Others believe that Athena, the goddess of wisdom, always looked at him with a special curiosity, perhaps because he, like her, was born from an act of singularity, of exception. Perhaps because they both symbolized, in different ways, the strength of the mind. But Hephaestus' return to Olympus was not just a story about a god. It is an allegory about the return of the marginalized, about the revaluation of work, about the recognition of silent talent in a world where the gods compete in brilliance and pride. Hephaestus is the modest voice of the unglorified creation. He does not demand, does not praise, not shout. But without him, the world would have no form, no instruments, no monuments. Olympus welcomed him back, but Hephaestus never became the festive god. He remained in his workshop, amidst sparks and smoke, shaping weapons for heroes and artifacts for gods. And yet, each stroke of his hammer now rang with a new authority, that of a god who had earned his place not by inheritance but by merit. In the silence of that return, a truth greater than any legend is hidden. Even the forgotten can become essential. Even the banished can become founders. And sometimes, the way back is, in fact, the way to true glory. Chapter 2. The Marriage of Aphrodite. On Mount Olympus, where beauty and power intertwine in divine games, the news spread faster than Zeus' lightning. Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, was to marry Aphrodite, the goddess of love and perfect beauty. It was news that aroused astonishment, sometimes hidden smiles, sometimes raised eyebrows. How could the ugliest of gods link his destiny with the most beautiful of goddesses? And yet, their marriage was not just a whim of fate, it was a symbolic union, a mythological contrast full of meanings. The union of fire with seduction, of technical creation with natural charm, of wound with ecstasy. In a pantheon where appearances mattered so much, their bond seemed a challenge. Beauty was not everything. Even the goddess of love could be linked to a lame, deformed craftsman, but with a titan's will. Some say that Zeus himself offered Aphrodite to Hephaestus as a reward for freeing Hera from the trap throne. Others claim that it was a strategic decision. Aphrodite, being so beautiful that she provoked rivalries between the gods, had to be tamed through a marriage that would maintain balance on Olympus. And who better suited than Hephaestus, passionate but calm, loving but silent, jealous but calculating? Their wedding was lavish, worthy of Olympus. Molten gold flowed from the gods' cups. The music of the muses vibrated in the air, and Aphrodite shone like a star in the middle of the night. Hephaestus, with his bronze clothes and hands burned by so much fire, seemed awkward next to her. And yet, in his eyes there was something that no other god had: gratitude. He didn't love her just with desire. He loved her with the humility of someone who had been deprived of love all his life. In the intimacy of their palace, however, things were not as harmonious. Aphrodite was libertine, attracted by passion and spontaneity. Hephaestus was deep, hard-working and possessive in his silence. He loved his wife not with the blaze of a straw fire, but with the smoldering embers of an old furnace, constant, burning but unseen. She, in turn, wanted adoration, play, adventure. He lacked the deep understanding of a silent love, built over time. Soon, their love turned into a mythological story of contrasts. Aphrodite turned her gaze to Ares, the god of war, everything that Hephaestus was not: vigorous, arrogant, impetuous. Their adulterous love became legendary, and the betrayal took on immortal echoes. But Hephaestus, in the silence of his workshop, knew. Nothing escaped him, not even the secret movements of the gods. And so he, the silent craftsman, conceived a new trap, an invisible, fine net, woven from golden threads, impossible to break or see with the naked eye. Carefully mounted it above the marital bed. Then he left, waiting. When Aphrodite and Ares fell into the nets of passion, the net he gathered around them, he had caught them naked, chained, with no escape. Hephaestus called all the gods as witnesses to the betrayal. The scene was scandalous, a grotesque spectacle, but also amusing to those who loved gossip and irony. The gods laughed, not because they despised Hephaestus' pain, but because, in their eternal logic, any weakness is a source of entertainment. But in Hephaestus' heart there was no laughter. There was a silent, old, deep pain. He had been betrayed not only by his wife, but also by a brother. He had been exposed again in front of those who had never considered him an equal. And yet, he did not lose his dignity. He did not seek bloody revenge. He did not curse. He released them both, and went back to his workshop. His marriage to Aphrodite did not end necessarily then. In some versions, it continues with a mixture of distance, misunderstandings and silence. In others, it falls apart for good. But beyond the mythological facts, the powerful symbolism remains. The impossible union of two worlds, that of ephemeral beauty and that of lasting creation. Aphrodite remained a goddess of seduction. Hephaestus remained a god of creation. She awakened desire, he learned to endure. And in this failed union, the myth found a form of profound truth. Love is not always balance. Sometimes it is contrast. Sometimes, beauty cannot love the fire that sustains it. And sometimes, those who build everything are the most forgotten. But Hephaestus did not stop creating. Maybe because he knew that love betrays, but art remains. And maybe because, in every weapon he forged, in every ornament he shaped, he put a piece of his heart, the one that Aphrodite never knew how to fully understand. While the other gods carved their fame through fights, love or divine games, Hephaestus built his in the sound of the hammer, hitting the anvil, in the sparks that danced from the depths of his underground forge, and the darkness of the volcanoes, where fire is not punishment, but a source of creation. He worked without stopping, with silent precision, transfiguring metal into magic, fire into forms, and pain into immortal art. His workshop, hidden under the island of Lemnos or in the heart of Etna, was a sacred place, forbidden to mortals. Legends say that its walls were made of shining copper, with doors that opened by themselves, and the air vibrated with the song of tools moved by golden servants, automatons, human faces forged by his hand, with a soul of sparks. They were the first mechanical life forms in mythology, proof of his technological genius. Hephaestus did not just create objects, he created symbols, extensions of those who wore them. His most famous work is, without a doubt, the armor of Achilles. Asked by the goddess Thetis, the hero's mother, to give her son new protection for the fight against the Trojans, Hephaestus made more than a simple breastplate. He poured into his shield an entire world, a small cosmos in miniature, with cities in war and in peace, with fields and dances, with the starry sky and the dark seas. He was not just a shield, but a vision of life, of ephemerality, of order in chaos. That was perhaps the most poetic of his crafts, a weapon that did not kill, but story. But Hephaestus did not work only for mortals. For Zeus, he forged the lightning bolts, weapons of light and thunder, capable of slaying titans. For Hermes, he created the winged sandals and the caduceus staff. For Apollo, the divine lyre. For Ares, the helmet and shield that had never known defeat. Even Aphrodite wore an enchanted belt, forged by Hephaestus, which increased desire in those who looked at her, a tragic irony, because that object, intended to strengthen her bond with him, had become the tool of other seductions. In his workshop, Hephaestus gave birth to amazing inventions that crossed the boundaries of simple utility. The most spectacular were the golden servants, animated statues, with programmed will and divine precision. They walked, talked, brought tools, lit the forge. They were the embodiment of the idea that craftsmanship can replace even life. Hephaestus also built Hera's trap throne, a poisoned gift for the mother who had thrown him from Olympus. When he sat on it, Hera was caught in invisible chains, and no god could free her. Only Hephaestus, with a silent smile and a cold mind, held the key to untying it, an example that his art could enslave or free, depending on the will of the creator. It is said that Hephaestus also built the palaces of the gods, with automatic doors, tables that moved by themselves and chairs that followed the gods like devoted dogs. In a mythological age dominated by magic, he introduced something different, technology in his hands. Myth met with the anticipation of a world in which art and science were no longer separate. For Hephaestus, fire was not destruction, it was birth. With it, he melted metals, but also pain. Because every piece he created bore the traces of his own suffering in a subtle way. Each object was a victory over his disability. If his body could not dance like Apollo's or fight like Ares, his hands could create things that no other god could match. Each creation was a silent manifesto of his worth. And he needed no applause or admiration. He created because only in art did he feel that he truly existed. Fire was to him what beauty was to Aphrodite, a vital essence. Hephaestus did not have statues dedicated to him in every city. He was not celebrated with war songs or love stories. But in every temple, in every shield, in every sacred arrow or relic, something of his art lived. His craft was immortal not only because the objects did not break, but because in each one there was a part of the god's soul. Patience, precision, pain, hidden beauty. He showed gods and mortals that not only strength or charm mattered, but also creation. That you don't need to shine in the spotlight to shape the world. That you can change everything by working in silence, in a hidden workshop, with fire and metal, but with a heart more alive than that of any warrior. And perhaps, precisely for this reason, the name of Hephaestus survived not only in myths, but also in the fires of every craftsman, in the hammers of every blacksmith, in the brilliance of every object crafted with soul on Olympus. Among the goddesses who symbolized love, revenge, or nature, Athena stood out for a silent and noble force. She was the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and rational art. Unlike Aphrodite, she did not conquer through beauty, but through thought, judgment, and balance. And of all the gods, only one seemed to share this inner, deep nature, devoid of vanity: Hephaestus. Some myths link them in a strange, perhaps even uncomfortable story, a failed attempt by Hephaestus to possess the goddess, firmly rejected by her. From that rejection, Erichthonius, the legendary hero of Athens, born from the earth and raised by the goddess as an adoptive mother, would have been born. But beyond this legend, the symbolic relationship between them was one of spiritual complementarity. Mind and hand, thought and deed, plan and execution. Hephaestus and Athena shared something that few gods valued: art.Functional, beautiful not only in form but also in purpose. He created tools, weapons, machinery. She taught mortals to weave, to build, to think before they acted. Both detested chaos, preferred order, structure, discipline. That is why, in Greek mythology, Hephaestus' workshop is often the place where Athenian thought takes shape. Not infrequently the two work together on sacred objects: living statues, glorious temples, strategic shields, or invincible walls. Athena came up with the idea, Hephaestus turned it into reality. Their relationship was a collaboration between craftsmanship and intellectual inspiration. In a world where tools were rarely seen as sacred, the two gods showed that creating is a divine act, as powerful as fighting or loving. The deep irony of the bond between them begins with the very birth of Athena, which would not have been possible without Hephaestus. When Zeus was seized by an unbearable headache, the gods did not know how to help him. Only Hephaestus, with his hammer, had the courage and wisdom to hit Zeus on the forehead. From the split skull came the Athena, armed and wise, born not from the womb, but from the mind. This image says everything about their connection. He, the craftsman, opens the way for her. She, the embodied thought, is born through his hand. The birth of the goddess is the ultimate symbol of the fusion of craft and intellect, between the man who creates and the idea that guides. Unlike other gods, both had a deep connection with the mortal world. Not through whims or entertainment, but through the gift of knowledge. Athena gave people the plow, the stamp of law, the ability to build cities. Hephaestus gave them the tools to shape the physical world: domestic fire, the hammer, the anvil, the first forms of metallurgy, and their temples, often built together. Learning and craft went hand in hand. Athena was the protector of weavers, but Hephaestus was the one who made the spindles and weaving looms. She taught the strategies of battle, but he created the shields that made them possible. In Athens, the capital of Greek wisdom, the name of the goddess reigned, but in every column, vault, and statue, the spirit of Hephaestus lived silently. The relationship between Hephaestus and Athena contrasts sharply with other mythological bonds, often marked by emotion, passion, violence, or desire. Between the two there was no romantic love, but mutual respect. There were no scandals, jealousies or betrayals, but cooperation and complementarity. And no other divine pair expresses the idea of rational balance more clearly. And perhaps that is precisely why their myth is not as famous. It is not spectacular, but it is profound. In essence, their bond becomes the symbol of an entire civilization. Ancient Greece, culture in which beauty was synonymous with usefulness, and cities rose through thought and work. Athens and Hephaestus were the patrons of architecture, applied arts, practical thinking and strategy. They represented the invisible pillars of a world that valued not only the powerful gods, but also those who knew how to build. Thus, the bond between Athena and Hephaestus is not a love story, but one of creation. He is not about attraction, but about admiration. He is a union between the divine mind and the divine hand, a mythological lesson about what happens when wisdom and craftsmanship work together. When mortals were sent to fight monsters or face fate, they rarely did so with their bare hands. Behind every legendary hero lurked, silent and unseen, Hephaestus, the blacksmith god. He was not on the battlefield, but his presence was felt in the shine of shields, in the weight of swords, in the brilliance of helmets. If the heroes had the courage, Hephaestus provided them with the means. For each destiny chosen by the gods, Hephaestus cast armor, weapons and tools, objects not only useful, but magical, unique, animated by genius and the eternal flames of his forge. The most famous of his creations is, without a doubt, the armor of Achilles, but especially the shield, a work of art and magic described in detail by Homer in the Iliad. When Patroclus was killed, and Achilles' armor was lost, Thetis, the hero's mother, ascended Olympus and asked Hephaestus to forge a new one. And Hephaestus made more than just a simple breastplate. He created a miniature world, cast in bronze, gold and silver. On the shield were two cities, one at war, the other at peace. Sown fields, herds, shepherds, wedding dances, courts in the agora, the whole of human life in a metal circle. The shield was not just protection, it was a philosophical vision, a reminder of the ephemeral, of order and chaos coexisting. Achilles became invincible with that armor, not only through its resistance, but also through its meaning. His struggle became universal, a symbol of human destiny. And behind that force stood Hephaestus, the silent creator. Another legendary hero who benefited from Hephaestus' skill was Heracles, the one who accomplished the 12 impossible labors. Hephaestus provided him with a quiver of invincible arrows, in some variants, but also armor resistant to poison and fire. Although Heracles was brute force embodied, even he needed the protection of divine art. It is said that one of Heracles' arrows, dipped in the blood of the Hydra, was so powerful that it killed both mortals and demigods. Hephaestus provided the setting. Heracles added cruelty to the fight. Perseus, the hero who beheaded Medusa, would not have succeeded without divine tools. Among the gifts he received is the mirrored shield, forged by Hephaestus, which allowed him to look at the Gorgon without being turned to stone. That shield was not just a tool of defense, but a tool of thought, a symbol of intelligence and prudence. Hephaestus did not offer Perseus an immortal sword, but a way to defeat evil without looking it directly in the face. He created an instrument of indirect knowledge, of applied wisdom. In Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas, the mythical founder of Rome, receives from his mother Venus an armor created by Hephaestus. forged in divine flames, it bears on it scenes from the future of Rome, battles, glory, leaders. Aeneas' shield is, like that of Achilles, a text visual. This creation is special. It not only defends, but also prophesies. Aeneas carries a story that has not yet happened. Hephaestus, in this version, is no longer just a craftsman, he becomes a cosmic narrator. Even if he is not directly attributed to him in all the myths, some ancient authors claim that Hephaestus contributed to the construction of the Argo, the ship of the Argonaut heroes. This was not a simple boat, it had a living mast, given by Athena and possibly forged in Hephaestus's forge. The ship spoke, warned, guided, was a semi-divine entity, built of wood and bronze, but animated by intention and spirit. If it was Hephaestus's creation, it was one of the most spectacular, a living ship for a unique mission. Although not all legends preserve the name of Hephaestus as a forger, many of the hero's weapons were indirectly inspired by him or his school of divine art. He is the prototype, the source. Whether it was a legendary sword or a golden helmet, in every masterpiece of the heroic world lived the trace of his fire, the roar of the hammer on the anvil, the precision of his deformed hand. Hephaestus was not just a supplier of weapons, he was a demiurge, a shaper of the physical and symbolic world. While other gods gave orders or blessings, he worked with matter itself. He knew that the hero, no matter how brave, needs support. He knew that fate can only be beautiful if someone pours it into metal and fire. He offered power, but also meaning. Every weapon had a story. Every object bore the imprint of destiny. Without Hephaestus, many of the legendary heroes would have remained only names. He did not fight in their wars, but he was there, in every victory, in every rescue, in every object that made a difference. He was the silent voice behind the glory. And so, while heroes became immortal through deeds, Hephaestus became immortal through their creations. Of all the gods of Olympus, Hephaestus was the only one who worked, who transformed matter and gave it form. But his genius did not stop at weapons or armor. He went far beyond the limits of functional art. He created artificial life. In an era when the idea of a soul was the domain of divinity, Hephaestus dared to create animated beings from metal, automatons that walked, talked, served and, sometimes, destroyed. In his workshop, the god Blacksmith was not just a craftsman, he became a partaker of divine creation. Perhaps the most amazing of all Hephaestus' inventions were the golden handmaids, 2 women made of precious metal, but animated with thought and voice. Not just decorative dolls, but entities capable of understanding orders, speaking and anticipating the needs of their master. Homer, in the Iliad, describes them simple, but remarkable. 2 golden maidens supported him, with gifted minds and human voices. They helped Hephaestus to walk, move and work, since his gait was heavy and lame. Thus, the deformed and marginalized god becomes the first inventor of human robots and the world of myth. These maids are not only technical miracles, but also symbols of a primitive artificial intelligence, proof that Hephaestus could give shape and life to consciousness, without having the living soul of gods or mortals. One of Hephaestus' most famous creations is Pandora, the first mortal woman, created at the command of Zeus to punish humanity. She was not born, but made. From clay, with the help of fire and the gifts offered by all the gods, Hephaestus molded a being perfect on the outside, but who carried a difficult fate within her. Pandora is the symbol of a beautiful creation but dangerous. of the gift that contains a curse. Forged with extraordinary craftsmanship, she was endowed with charm, a sweet voice, skill in crafts and curiosity. And it was she who, opening the forbidden box, released all the evils into the world: suffering, disease, war, death. Hephaestus, through his hands, shaped a divine trap. And at the same time, he created a symbol: the beautiful that brings misfortune, the creation that escapes the control of the Creator, a warning about the limits of divine intervention in human nature. Another famous automaton, said to have been created by Hephaestus, is Talos, the bronze giant who guarded the island of Crete. Once again, Hephaestus is not satisfied with useful or static things. He creates a war machine. Talos was a mechanical giant who circled the island 3 times a day and threw boulders at enemy ships. He had a single vein, which crossed his body from head to toe, sealed with a bronze nail. When this was torn out by Medea, the giant collapsed, his blood, a divine liquid called ichor, flowing out. Talos symbolizes both the protective force created by man and the vulnerability of the strongest constructions. It is also a disturbing image of what happens when man or God creates something that no longer has a soul, but has destructive power. What differentiates Hephaestus from the other gods is that he does not create lives out of love or wisdom, but out of craft. He shapes. He does not give birth, but builds. He does not inspire life in a spiritual sense, but in a mechanical, functional sense. This form of creation is unique in mythology. If Athena gives birth to ideas and Apollo inspires arts, Hephaestus pours, welds, hammers metal to produce animated forms. He brings into the world beings that are not alive in the traditional sense, but that simulate life, a concept that anticipates, in a mythical way, the modern idea of artificial intelligence. Symbolism of automata. In Greek mythology, the automata of Hephaestus are not just fantasies. They convey profound ideas. The fear of soulless creation. When man or God creates without compassion, the result can be dangerous. The power of craftsmanship. Hephaestus' creations can compete with nature itself, but they cannot completely replace it. The world between order and chaos. Automata are purposefully crafted, but they can get out of control, just as Pandora brought chaos into the world. Today, Hephaestus can be seen as the first mythological engineer. He understood fire, metal, proportions. But more than that, he understood the limits between creation and responsibility. Although he created beings, he was not the god of life, but of form, of structure. Through his golden servants, Talos and Pandora, Hephaestus left his mark on one of the most disturbing themes of humanity. What happens when man creates something that seems alive, but has no soul? In a world where the gods lived on sacred heights, in the shining palaces of Mount Olympus, Hephaestus had found his refuge in the depths. His workshop was not a temple open to the sky, but a forge hidden underground, where lava and hot steam nourished creation. There, in the incandescent darkness, dreams did not live, but forms, mechanisms and transformed matter. This was the world of Hephaestus, a universe of fire, metal and divine work. Under Mount Etna in Sicily, from where steam and smoke were said to come out because of his incessant work. Volcanic eruptions were interpreted as the result of the blows of his hammer on the anvil and the depths of the sea, in a cave where he was saved after Hera threw him from Olympus. Some versions say that it was there that he began his first inventions, helped by the Nereids, on Olympus, in the later myths. It is mentioned that Hephaestus also had a divine workshop in his own palace, surrounded by automatic tools and golden assistants. Regardless of the place, the workshop was not just a simple room, it was a functional universe, a magical space where knowledge, suffering and craftsmanship merged. Hephaestus' workshop was, in myth, a living place. Eternal fires that burned without ceasing, fed by the power of the earth. Giant anvils, which the gods struck with a huge hammer. Automatic bellows, which blew air over the fire to maintain the heat necessary for the processing of metals. Animated tools, some with their own movement, which assisted him as if they were endowed with will. Rare and divine metals. Gold, silver, bronze, but also mythical metals, which do not exist in the mortal world. Everything was organized with the precision of a laboratory. It was not a chaos of flames, but a symphony of fire, metal, and art. Every corner of the workshop had a purpose. Every sound, whether the rhythmic beats of the hammer or the hiss of the cooled metal, was part of an order of creation. Hephaestus' forge is not just a physical place, it is a profound metaphor for transformation through pain. Just as metal must be passed through fire to become a weapon or an ornament, so too the human being is perfected through suffering, effort and time. Hephaestus himself, wounded and rejected, transformed his disability into a creative force. Hidden knowledge. In opposition to the temple raised to the sky, the forge is underground, secret, deep. It represents silent work and deep thinking, as opposed to the rapid and luminous inspiration of the muses. It is the place where ideas are born after being melted, shaped, and tempered. The creative power of matter. Hephaestus does not create from nothing, like other gods, but from raw matter. He shapes what already exists. His forge is a reflection of human art, where talent and effort meet. Unlike Athena, the goddess of pure wisdom, or Apollo, the god of art and light, Hephaestus does not seek abstract perfection. He creates useful and functional things, but full of practical beauty. His workshop is the temple of applied labor. 'Tis the only god who sweats, who gets dirty, who labors for creation. This makes him close to people. If other gods inspired or led, Hephaestus worked, like mortals. Hephaestus' forge became a powerful symbol of craftsmanship. Ancient blacksmiths, jewelers, armorers and architects considered him their patron. Spiritual transformation. In philosophy, the fire of the forge was compared to the fire of knowledge that purifies the mind. Innovation. Hephaestus was seen as the archetypal inventor, the father of prototypes, engineering, and technology. In the Middle Ages, he inspired the figure of the brilliant craftsman, but also myths about isolated alchemists searching for philosophical gold in the depths. In modern times, he is remembered in science fiction as the archetype of the divine engineer, the one who creates living machines with their own will. Hephaestus' workshop was not just the place where weapons were made. It was the heart of a moving world. There, in the regular beats of the hammer on metal, ideas, forms, almost real lives were born. There, a deformed and exiled god found his power not in beauty, but in work, patience and genius. Hephaestus' forge is, after all, the place where matter becomes meaning, and suffering becomes creation. And from the depths of that workshop, the echo of the hammer that beats, creates and gives shape to the world, still resounds. Chapter 3. Hephaestus and the Sacred Fire. Of all the primordial elements, fire is the most ambiguous. It can destroy, but also create. It can purify, but also consume. In Greek mythology, fire is not just a source of heat or light. It is the life force of technology, craft, and progress. And the one who masters it absolutely is Hephaestus, the blacksmith god. Through him, fire becomes not only a weapon of the gods, but also a gift to humanity. Hephaestus is not the god of fire in the crude sense of scorching flames. He is the god of controlled fire, of the flame in the forge, of the heat that melts and shapes metal. He is an inner fire, tamed and directed, that transforms inert matter into art and utility. He controls fire not as a wild entity, but as a means of creation. This control differentiates him from figures like Ares, who destroy, or Dionysus, who disrupts order. Hephaestus builds and establishes. In Greek mythology, fire is the symbol of technological knowledge. Without it, people cannot cook, forge weapons, or build durable homes. Therefore, fire becomes the basic condition of civilization. Although myth attributes the theft of fire to Prometheus, it is Hephaestus who first mastered and used it. In fact, Hephaestus is the one who taught fire to obey commands, transforming it from a chaotic force into a working tool. He built furnaces and anvils, the first forms of applied technology. He created tools and weapons, providing people with essential tools for survival and defense. Thus, Hephaestus can be seen as the father of technology, and fire, as the essence of civilization, is its ultimate instrument. Prometheus was the one who stole fire to give it to humans, a gesture of rebellion and compassion. But without Hephaestus, that fire had no meaning. He was an empty flame, devoid of direction. Hephaestus, in turn, gave it form and functionality. Without a god of craftsmanship, fire would have been a simple spark. Thus, Hephaestus and Prometheus complement each other. Prometheus, the bringer of fire. Hephaestus, the creator of technology that transforms fire into civilization. One brings the gift, the other gives it value. Through his sacred fire, Hephaestus contributes to maintaining the balance of the world. When he creates armor for the gods or objects of power, he strengthens the cosmic order. He does not allow himself to be carried away by ambition. He does not seek glory, but serves universal harmony. For example, to create the shield of Achilles meant not only to equip a hero, but to offer a symbolic image of the entire world. To forge the chains for Prometheus meant to restore the will of Zeus, even though he himself had been, in a sense, an ally of the fire given to humanity. Hephaestus is, therefore, the intermediary between chaos and order, between raw matter and the formed world, between instinct and reason. Symbolically, Hephaestus' fire also represents the inner power to overcome limits. The god himself is an example. Born with physical defects, thrown from Olympus, wounded and marginalized, he manages to find an identity not through strength or beauty, but through skill and work. Thus, his fire becomes the flame of will and creativity. a symbol of the power to transform suffering into strength and imperfection into masterpiece. From antiquity to the present, the image of Hephaestus and his fire have influenced artists and craftsmen, who revered him as the patron of material creation, philosophers and alchemists, who saw in him the model of spiritual transformation, modern writers and inventors, who transformed him into a symbol of the brilliant engineer, of the forgotten but indispensable craftsman. The fire of Hephaestus continues to burn in every idea transformed into reality, in every invention that improves human life. If in other religions fire is an element of purification or destruction, in Greek mythology, through Hephaestus, he is the heat of creation, knowledge and civilization. It is no coincidence that the first large cities in ancient Greece had blacksmith workshops close to temples. Where there was fire, there was also civilization. Hephaestus is not only the master of the forge, he is the one who brought fire under the control of the rational will. Through him, the flame becomes a guiding light, not just blind combustion. And humanity, learning to control it, steps out of darkness into the world. Hephaestus is not only the god of craftsmanship and divine fire, but also one of the most ambiguous characters in the Olympian pantheon. While most gods lived in pomp and prestige, Hephaestus lived on the edge of glory, an exile brought back into the bosom of divinity, but never completely accepted. It was precisely this position between the center and the periphery that transformed him, in time, both an essential ally and a latent rival of the other gods. The relationship between Hephaestus and Hera, his mother, is defined by wounds and revenge. In some versions, Hera conceived him alone, out of jealousy of the birth of Athena by Zeus. At birth, disappointed with his physical appearance, she threw him from Olympus. The fall deformed his body and marked his destiny. Later, Hephaestus takes his revenge with crafted elegance, sending Hera a golden throne that holds her captive. Only he could free the mechanism, and to escape, the gods were forced to call Olympus back. Thus, the mother-son relationship becomes a conflict between authority and talent. Hera, the goddess of order and honor, confronted by her own son, who defeats her not through war but through ingenuity. With Zeus, the relationship is even more ambiguous. In some myths, Hephaestus is his son. In others he is not. It is certain that Zeus recognizes Hephaestus' talent, but does not treat him with full equality. He uses him as an indispensable technician, but keeps him at a distance from important decisions. However, Hephaestus creates for Zeus the sacred lightning bolt, the symbol of supreme power, the chain with which he binds Prometheus, thus supporting divine authority. Objects for the goddesses of fate and justice, strengthening the Olympian order. Therefore, between Hephaestus and Zeus there is a relationship of strategic collaboration. The supreme god needs him, but keeps him under control, and Hephaestus cooperates, without betraying his individuality. If there is a god with whom Hephaestus shares a deep affinity, it is Athena. Both represent active intelligence, but in different forms. Athena is tactical and rational wisdom. Hephaestus is applied thinking, concrete transformation. They collaborate in many myths, especially in connection with inventions, arts and cities. Athena is the patroness of weaving, Hephaestus of blacksmithing. Together, They represent the union of art with science, of thought with deed. However, the Greek myth has a controversial version. Hephaestus pursues Athena, desiring her as a woman. She rejects him, but the trace left by his attempt leads to the birth of Erichthonius, a child raised by Athena and considered the mythical ancestor of the Athenians. Thus, from rivalry and tension, a symbol of civilization is born. The marriage between Hephaestus and Aphrodite seems like an ironic joke of the gods. He, deformed and industrious; she, the goddess of beauty and passion. Their union is more symbolic than emotional. Aphrodite openly cheats on him with Ares, and Hephaestus, wounded in pride, catches them in an invisible net, exposing them to the ridicule of all Olympus. Through this episode, Hephaestus once again asserts his invisible power. Although he is not beautiful or a warrior, he controls technology, capable of humiliating even the goddess of love and the god of war. The relationship with Ares is defined by fundamental opposition. Ares is the god of instinct, blood and brute force. Hephaestus, of mind, construction and patience. Although Hephaestus creates the weapons for warriors, he does not glorify destruction. Between him and Ares, the conflict between artisan and barbarian, between intelligence and impulse, takes shape. Their relationship becomes personal when Ares steals his wife's love. That moment, Hephaestus goes from abstract opponent to concrete rival, and manages to ridicule him in front of the gods. Without raising a weapon point, one of the few gods who treated Hephaestus with understanding is Dionysus, in the episode in which the gods want to bring Hephaestus back to Olympus. Only Dionysus manages to convince him, not by force, but by offering him wine and friendship. Together, the two represent the creative forces of Hephaestus, the hands that build, Dionysus, the emotion that inspires, and the world of perfect gods. They are imperfections that humanize the pantheon. Hermes, the god of messenger and commerce, collaborates with Hephaestus in several legends. Together, they have a relationship of technology plus mobility. Hephaestus creates magical objects, flying sandals, invisible weapons, and Hermes uses them with skill. Hermes is the playful and opportunistic spirit, Hephaestus, the serious builder. Together, they offer an image of practical creativity in action. Hephaestus and Apollo coexist in parallel worlds. Apollo represents ideal art, music and light, while Hephaestus is the architect of sound and form. They respect each other, but remain distant. Apollo embodies harmony, Hephaestus, useful dissonance. Together, they could build a perfect world, but they rarely collaborate directly. Hephaestus is not a god marginalized by weakness, but by difference. It does not participate in the triumph of the gods through war, beauty, or magic, but through technology, patience, and work. Without him, Olympus would lack its weapons, thrones, ornaments, and structure. His strained relations with the other gods only serve to highlight his unique role. The silent creator, indispensable in a world dominated by force and appearance. Hephaestus does not shine, but illuminates the world. With the flames of his forge, in a world where most gods symbolize the forces of nature, human passions, or abstract ideals, Hephaestus was an exception. He was the divine craftsman who not only mastered matter, but also gave it life. Long before modern concepts of robotics, artificial intelligence, or automation, Greek myths attribute amazing creations to Hephaestus. autonomous machines, living mechanisms, golden maids, and self-directed instruments. This chapter explores these fascinating inventions, not only as expressions of divine creativity, but as mythical anticipations of a future technology. 1. Golden maidens, the androids of antiquity. One of the most impressive inventions of Hephaestus are the golden maids, mentioned by Homer in the Iliad. These beings were not simple statues, but animated automatons, capable of moving, speaking, and understanding the commands of the god. 2 golden maids supported his steps, endowed with wisdom, voice, and power. These servants, they were made entirely of gold, the perfect metal, but they had intelligence and consciousness. They helped Hephaestus move, being part of his physical support system, given his disability. They had multiple functions: assistance in the workshop, communication, mobility. They are, in essence, androids, with a high degree of autonomy. And the mythological vision, Hephaestus does not just create matter, but programs it with life and functionality, a profoundly modern idea. 2. Talos, the mechanical giant of Crete. Another fabulous creation of Hephaestus is Talos, the bronze giant meant to defend the island of Crete. Talos was a gigantic statue with a human form, but endowed with movement and will, capable of patrolling 3 times a day around the island. His main weapon was heating up red-hot and crushing enemies with his metal arms. He had only one vulnerable point: a nail in his ankle, which closed the veins through which the ichor, the divine essence, flowed. Talos is one of the oldest examples of an autonomous mechanized being with a military function, the mythological equivalent of a god robot. Hephaestus, through him, transformed the art of craftsmanship into a strategic defense force. 3. The trap chair for Hera. Returning to the episode of revenge against Hera, the golden throne he offered her is actually an automatic machine with a captivity function. Once Hera sat down, hidden mechanisms were activated. The throne caught her with metal arms. It could only be released by Hephaestus himself. It was impossible to destroy or deactivate by the other gods. This invention is not only symbolic, but also a sophisticated trapping device, triggered by pressure or contact, exactly how some modern security systems work. 4. The deep workshop, the automatic forge. Hephaestus' workshop, located either inside a volcano like Etna, or in the depths of the sea, was described as a space where tools moved by themselves, and hammers and anvils worked without direct intervention. The tools rose by themselves, obeying the will of the master. This suggests the existence of an automated production system, a mythological precursor to the modern factory. Each tool has its own will. The creative process is continuous and coordinated without the constant presence of the craftsman. The workshops are animated by an inner energy, a life of the machine. Thus, Hephaestus becomes a visionary of automated production, centuries before the concept of industrialization. 5. Smart weapons and objects. Some weapons or objects made by Hephaestus had almost magical functions, but in essence, They are examples of advanced technology. The shield of Achilles, which depicted the entire world, with moving scenes, a circular screen, an animated map. Invisible helmets or armor, with camouflage properties, similar to the modern concept of stealth technology. Movable bridges or automatic doors to the palaces of the gods, controlled by hidden commands or mechanisms. All of this reflects a deeply advanced technological vision, in which matter is organized and programmed to serve a complex function. 6. Inspiration for modern technologies. Hephaestus machines have been reinterpreted over time in Greek automata from the Hellenistic era, Hera of Alexandria, with doors that open by themselves and mechanical theaters. Renaissance, where Hephaestus was seen as the patron saint of inventors and engineering. Modern science fiction, where similar figures, such as Iron Man or the creators of robots, are, in essence, heirs to the Hephaestus's vision. Hephaestus is not only the blacksmith of the gods, but also the prototype of the futuristic engineer. He sees matter not as something passive, but as a malleable substance that can be endowed with its own functions. Whether it is golden maids or bronze giants, hammers that move by themselves or armor that thinks, Hephaestus introduces into mythology the idea that technology can be alive. Thus, he becomes the symbol of intelligent automation, machines animated, engineering fantasy ahead of its time, and a world dominated by gods of passion and chaos. Hephaestus brings order through technology, and his vision has not faded. It lives today in every robot, in every algorithm, in every digital workshop of our era. The story of Pandora is, in essence, a story of creation, but also of revenge. Zeus, angry with humans for the theft of fire by Prometheus, asked the gods to conceive a being perfect in appearance, but dangerous in essence. A beautiful woman, but bearer of suffering. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, was tasked with this work. Thus was born Pandora, the first mortal woman, an ambiguous symbol of beauty, curiosity, and misfortune. 1. A creation ordered by the gods, not by love. Pandora is not born of love, like Aphrodite, nor of primordial chaos, like Gaia. She is a planned creation, with a precise purpose: the punishment of humanity. After Prometheus stole fire for humans, giving them knowledge, progress, and civilization, Zeus decided to take revenge. But not head-on, but through a treacherous gift. I will give them a gift that will seem pleasant to them, but will bring them a curse. For this, Hephaestus was the main instrument, creating Pandora's body from clay, then endowing it with human and divine features. 2. Hephaestus, the creator of imperfect perfection. Hephaestus molded Pandora from fine clay, but he worked her with the same care and mastery with which he made armor or divine thrones. Although she was not a goddess, Pandora was extraordinarily beautiful, almost unearthly. Her body was of ideal harmony, with delicate forms and expressions. Her hands and face were expressive, almost alive, a sign of Hephaestus' talent to animate inert matter. Her movements were graceful, mechanically perfect, like the Golden Maids, another reflection of Hephaestus' art. But, paradoxically, this very beauty would be the instrument of the curse. Pandora was a living statue, a work of art that contained within it the promise of chaos. 3. The gifts of the other gods, charm and deception. After Hephaestus created her form, the other gods completed her with gifts. Athena gave her the craft of weaving. Aphrodite gave her irresistible beauty and seductive grace. Hermes instilled in her cunning, eloquence, and curiosity. Apollo gave her a sweet voice and musicality. Hera put jealousy and the desire for control in her heart. Hence her name, Pandora, meaning the one who received all gifts. But every gift was a potential danger. Beauty could arouse envy, words could deceive, curiosity could destroy. Pandora was, in essence, a poisoned gift. 4. Pandora's box. The fatal mystery. The gods gave Pandora a jar, often called Pandora's box, with the instruction to never open it. Inside were all the evils of the world: disease, suffering, death, sadness, war, betrayal, and time. Pandora was sent to earth and offered as a wife to Epimetheus, the less prudent brother of Prometheus. Although he had been warned not to accept any gift from the gods, Epimetheus, enchanted by Pandora's beauty, forgot the warning. Then, the inevitable happened. Pandora's curiosity won out. She lifted the lid of the jar, and all the misfortunes poured out upon the world. Only hope remained inside. 5. The symbolism of creation, between the divine and the human. Pandora is a unique creation, a hybrid between art, life, and punishment. Through her, Hephaestus manifests himself not only as a craftsman, but as a demiurge, shaping a being capable of influencing the destiny of humanity. She is the first woman, therefore the beginning of a new era. She is an aesthetic and psychological work, not just a physical one. She is the agent of decline, but also of transformation, from innocence to consciousness. A profound sense Hephaestus creates with his hands, but also with the will of the gods. Pandora is not the fruit of her dream, but the execution of a divine sentence. 6. Pandora and the image of women in Greek mythology. Through the myth of Pandora, the ancient Greeks projected onto women the fundamental ambivalence. On the one hand, women are beautiful, creative, maternal. On the other hand, they are the bearer of misfortune, the source of imbalance. The myth reflects a misogynistic vision of the era, but also a profound reflection on gifts wrapped in danger, on how beauty sometimes hides destruction. 7. Hephaestus, the creator with an ambiguous role. It is important to note, Hephaestus is not the author of evil, but the instrument through which evil was beautifully packaged. He does not decide who will suffer, but only shapes the form of suffering. In this sense, he is the artist subject to order, the ethical craftsman caught between art and consequences, the creator of a beauty that does not belong to him morally. Pandora is perhaps his most tragic work, not because it was imperfect, but because it was too perfect to be good. The myth of Pandora remains one of the most fascinating and controversial in Greek mythology. She is not just a woman, but a concept, an ambivalent symbol, beauty and perdition, but also the beginning of modern humanity. Through the hands of Hephaestus, matter became life. But life, without limits, became danger. In this chapter, we see how divine art can give rise not only to miracles, but also to catastrophes, and how, from a single form of clay, the entire complexity of the human condition can be born. In the pantheon of Greek gods, few relationships seem more unlikely than that between Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, deformed, lame, withdrawn into the depths of his forge. She, radiance incarnate, desired by all, adored by the whole world. And yet, the gods married. Not out of love, but by the will of Zeus. But their marriage, although official, was full of humiliation, betrayal, and misunderstandings. 1. The marriage arranged by Zeus. After Hephaestus returned to Olympus, following the famous episode in which he freed Hera from the throne trap, Zeus decided to reward him. But not with gold, not with honor, but with Aphrodite, the most beautiful of the goddesses, as his wife. Zeus's motivations are multiple. For Hephaestus, it was a gesture of integration and reward. For Aphrodite, it was a way to temper his seductive power, which threatened the divine balance. For the other gods, it was to extinguish the rivalry for Aphrodite's hand, which caused jealousy and conflict. Thus, their union is not one of feelings, but of political and symbolic balance. 2. A relationship of profound contrast. From the first moments, the marriage between Hephaestus and Aphrodite seems doomed to failure. The contrasts between them are striking. Hephaestus Aphrodite, god of fire, craftsmanship, forge goddess of beauty, love and seduction. Ugly, deformed, lame beautiful, radiant, irresistible. Retired, hard-working, modest extroverted, passionate, adored. Creation, art, logic desire, sensuality, emotion. Aphrodite looks at him with silent contempt, and although he admires her, he cannot truly touch her, not only physically, but emotionally. They live in completely different worlds. Hephaestus in volcanoes and workshops, Aphrodite on fragrant shores and in the hearts of mortals. 3. Infidelity with Ares, the ultimate humiliation. Despite their marriage, Aphrodite loves Ares, the god of war. Their relationship becomes notorious on Olympus. Hephaestus, silent at first, begins to suspect and then investigate. Then, in his artisan spirit, he plots a revenge that is not violent, but humiliating. He creates an invisible net, impossible to break, which he installs above the marital bed. One day, when Aphrodite and Ares make love in that bed, the net activates and catches them red-handed. Hephaestus calls all the gods to witness. The scene is humiliating for Aphrodite and Ares, but also dubiously glorious for Hephaestus, who becomes the butt of jokes. Although Ares is forced to pay a symbolic fine, Hephaestus' reputation remains tarnished by ridicule. 4. A symbolic marriage between creation and seduction. The marriage of the two gods is not just a failed love story, but a complex symbol. Hephaestus represents the mind, art, craft, things created with labor. Aphrodite embodies pleasure, desire, impulse, things that escape rational control. Their union symbolizes the meeting between the rational and the instinctive, between the craftsman who creates and the muse who inspires. But in this union, Hephaestus remains unfulfilled. Aphrodite cannot be possessed, only adored from afar. 5. Breakup and consequences. After the episode with Ares, the marriage is practically compromised, and some versions of the myth. Hephaestus banishes his wife, refusing to welcome her into the house anymore, and others. Aphrodite leaves him, choosing Ares as her de facto partner. Other myths say that Zeus annuls the marriage, and Aphrodite becomes freed. In any case, their official bond disappears, remaining only as a mythological lesson about incompatibility. 6. Image in art and literature. Greek artists and poets were fascinated by this paradoxical relationship. On painted vessels, Aphrodite often appears disinterested or ironic towards Hephaestus. Sculptors show Hephaestus alone in his workshop, thinking, while Aphrodite is represented alongside Ares. In comedies, the scene of being caught in a net is a classic source of humor. This relationship became an archetype for unbalanced couples, in which physical beauty and inner genius cannot harmonize. 7. An ambiguous but meaningful ending. Hephaestus, despite the betrayal, does not become cynical. He continues to create, to craft, to bring progress. Aphrodite, on the other hand, continues to seduce and inspire. Although separated, both contribute to the destiny of the world, one through art and fire, the other through love and chaos. Hephaestus, the husband of the most beautiful goddess, remains a tragic and admirable character. He does not conquer through force, but through creation. He does not take revenge through hatred, but through genius. And, although his love is not shared, he remains a symbol of dignity in the face of rejection, of work in the face of superficiality. And the world of the gods, where beauty is often triumphant, Hephaestus reminds us that value lies not in appearance, but in what we build, in silence, with our hands. And the vast mythological universe of ancient Greece, the gods, they lived with passions and flaws similar to human ones. Love, jealousy, revenge, all found their echo among the Olympians. And one of the most famous and comical, but at the same time tragic events in the life of Hephaestus is related to Aphrodite's infidelity and his ingenious trap of adultery. 1. The painful suspicion. Hephaestus, although a god, was not blind to the reality of his marriage. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire, had never loved him. Their marriage had been imposed by Zeus, and their relationship was more formal than passionate. Over time, rumors of Aphrodite's affair with Ares, the god of war, began to reach the ears of the divine blacksmith. Locked in his workshop, Hephaestus brooded over his suspicions. He lacked the physical strength of his rival, but he possessed a sharp intelligence and unparalleled technical skill. Instead of giving in to violent jealousy, he chose to act in his own style, with patience, inventiveness, and mathematical precision. 2. A trap as a work of art. Hephaestus conceived a brilliant device, an invisible and indestructible net, fine as borangiculum, but strong as divine steel. This mechanical fabric, created with the help of hidden mechanisms and symbolic knives of his art, is stretched over the marital bed, where Aphrodite received her lover. The net was invisible day and night, could not be torn or untied, and was to be triggered automatically when the two lovers were in an embrace. This creation was not only a tool for catching, it was also a statement about the humiliation of betrayal to Hephaestus' suffering, his desire for justice, and perhaps a sliver of bitter revenge were concentrated in it. 3. Caught in the act. The plan works perfectly. One day, Ares and Aphrodite meet in the marital bed. The invisible net closes around them and keeps them trapped, naked, in a shameful position. Hephaestus thus surprises them and, without releasing them, calls the other gods to see the spectacle of shame. The gods respond to the invitation, in particular Apollo, Hermes, Poseidon, and the other men of Olympus come, and the scene that follows is memorable. The gods laugh out loud, joking about the situation and the ridiculous position in which Aphrodite and Ares were caught. Some laugh at those caught, others, more subtly, laugh at Hephaestus himself, who had to resort to a trap to get justice. 4. Humiliation or triumph. This scene has a double meaning in mythology. On the one hand, Hephaestus seems victorious. He, the despised and deceived, manages to demonstrate the betrayal. He transforms personal pain into a public lesson, using his craft to prove the truth. On the other hand, it is a bitter victory. The laughter of the gods is not only of complicity with his justice, but also of superiority. Hephaestus is seen as a humiliated man, who failed to keep his wife, who was replaced by the god of virility and war. In ancient comedies, the episode is often treated with crude humor. But beyond the joke, it remains a painful portrait of a betrayed man who chooses to defend himself through intelligence, not violence. 5. Release and separation. After all the gods witness the spectacle, Poseidon convinces Hephaestus to release them. In return, Ares must promise to pay a fine. Some versions say Ares never paid, others that the payment was symbolic. But Aphrodite will never return to the blacksmith's house. Their marriage breaks up for good. Aphrodite leaves him for Ares, and Hephaestus remains alone in his workshop. From that moment on, he will no longer love in the same way, and his future relationships will be linked to the earth, not to sensual love, but to lasting creation. 6. The symbolism of the trap. Hephaestus' trap is not just a physical tool, but an allegory. It is a symbol of the power of intelligence over brute force. It is a reflection of forced marriages, in which incompatibility inevitably leads to destruction. T is a metaphor for the fragility of beauty when it is not doubled by loyalty. On a larger scale, this story brings into question revenge through creativity. Hephaestus does not destroy, does not kill, does not curse, he only exposes, showing the truth in a form that causes shame, but not death. 7. Mythological and human lessons. Beyond the picturesqueness of the myth, the episode of the adultery trap conveys ideas that are valid even today. The truth sometimes needs the tools of thought, not just emotions. Revenge, no matter how intelligent, does not heal the wound of betrayal. Imposed fidelity does not work in a relationship devoid of real love. Hephaestus, although suffering, emerges from this story with his dignity intact. He did not descend to the level of his lover, but rose through ingenuity. The adultery trap is perhaps the most famous episode in Hephaestus' life, and also the most human. His revenge, although not bloody, leaves deep traces. He was not loved, but he defended his honor with the weapons that were his own, the fire of creation and immeasurable intelligence. The laughter of the gods can be forgotten, but his art, the invisible net of truth, remains immortal, a lesson about what it means to be betrayed, but to respond like a god. And the vast pantheon of the Olympian gods, each deity embodies an idealized form. The beauty of Aphrodite, the strength of Ares, the wisdom of Athena, the sovereignty of Zeus. But among these perfect gods, there is also Hephaestus, the only crippled, deformed god, rejected at birth, but whose hands shape the divine order itself, is the marginal, the excluded one from among the gods, but paradoxically, the unseen foundation of their world. 1. Marginalization from the beginning. From birth, Hephaestus is defined by otherness. Unlike the other gods, he is not a desired child. In some versions, he is born by Hera alone, as an act of revenge for the birth of Athena. In other versions, he is the son of Zeus and Hera. But regardless of his exact origin, his birth brings repulsion, not joy. Seeing him deformed, Hera throws him off Mount Olympus, an extreme gesture of divine exclusion. This fall is not only physical, but symbolic. Hephaestus is removed from the divine order, from Olympian perfection. He becomes the god who begins by being rejected. 2. The deformed body, the brilliant mind. Greek mythology idealizes the perfect body, symmetry, physical harmony. Hephaestus breaks this pattern. He is lame, hunchbacked, with calloused hands, heavy and slow in movement. But behind this body hides a divine intelligence, not a theoretical one, but a practical, applied one. Despite his disability, Hephaestus builds legendary weapons, Hades' helmet, Achilles' shield, creates palaces of bronze and moving gold, models goddesses, golden maids, animated mechanisms, offers the Greek world the art of metalworking, a symbol of civilization, thus becomes the archetype of the marginalized, but indispensable. Society may ignore those who do not conform to the norms, but durable constructions are still supported on their shoulders. 3. His place on Olympus. Almost, but never fully integrated. Even after he is readmitted to Olympus, Hephaestus remains peripheral. His workshop is not in the center of Zeus's palace, but on the edge, underground or in volcanoes. His fire smolders in the depths. It does not burn in shining valleys. He does not often participate in the councils of the gods. He is not invoked in dances or erotic rituals. He does not appear as a protagonist in heroic episodes or celestial battles. He is the god who works silently, in the shadows, forging shields and weapons for others, but never using them for himself. In this sense, Hephaestus reflects the condition of the craftsman, the artist, the technician, always essential, but often unseen. 4. The mirror of the excluded. Hephaestus becomes the universal symbol of the rejected, but full of value. He is the god of the different child, who does not fit into the expectations of his parents. He is the patron saint of the disabled man, who does not receive admiration for his appearances, but for what he creates. He is the image of the ignored artist, of the one who shapes worlds, but does not appear in the spotlight. And the ancient world, rigid in ideals, harsh with those who are different, Hephaestus offers a compassionate image of the marginal. He does not ask for mercy, but respect through competence. 5. Art as a form of revenge. Hephaestus does not fight with a sword, he does not launch thunderbolts. But he takes revenge through invention. The trap throne built for Hera is not an act of physical revenge, but a demonstration of intellectual superiority. The web of adultery is not violence, but a silent, perfectly calibrated trap. Therefore, marginalization does not harden him, but provokes him to transform suffering into creation. In a profound sense, Hephaestus is the god of psychological alchemy. Pain is the raw material, and invention is the transmutation into gold. 6. The modern symbol of the brilliant outsider. In the contemporary world, Hephaestus has deep echoes. In modern literature, he is the prototype of the misunderstood scientist, the despised but essential inventor. In psychology, he is the symbol of the wounded child, who finds himself through work and creativity. In modern art, he is the image of the underground artist, who creates with inner fire and does not need applause. Whether compared to characters like Victor Frankenstein, Stephen Hawking, or Steve Wozniak, the archetype of Hephaestus teaches us that value is not measured in physical perfection, but in the contribution made to the world. 7. Conclusion. The marginal who keeps the world standing. Hephaestus is the ultimate example that the periphery hides real power. Although ugly, lame, ignored, or ridiculed, he is the one who gives shape to divine reality. He is the blacksmith who turns the wheels of destiny, without appearing in glorious chronicles. In a world obsessed with form, Hephaestus reminds us that essence comes from the inner fire. He is the patron of the rejected, of those who do not shine on the surface, but who hold the key to progress in their hands. Thus, Hephaestus is not only a god of fire and metals, he is the eternal symbol of the brilliant marginal, of the one who fell from heaven, but who lit the flame of the world. Chapter 4. Erichthonios, the motherless son. The myths of ancient Greece are full of miraculous births, but few are as unusual and deeply symbolic as that of Erichthonios, a child born without a mother, the result of a failed attempt at union between Hephaestus and Athena. His story outlines a complex episode in which the gods act outside the laws of nature, and the consequences become pillars of the identity of an entire civilization. 1. The meeting of fire and wisdom. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, crafts, and strategy, has always been perceived as a virgin, untouched by desire or carnal love. Hephaestus, on the other hand, was dominated by the passion of creation, but also by the desire for a connection with the goddess of the intellectual ideal. According to the myth, after a conflict between the gods, Hephaestus is called by Athena to create weapons or magical objects for her. Delighted by her beauty and grandeur, Hephaestus is overwhelmed by an uncontrolled desire. In one version of the legend, he tries to rape her, but Athena forcibly rejects him, and the confusion of the moment, Hephaestus' seed falls to the earth, Gaia. From that unconsummated and accidental union, the earth itself gives birth to a child, Erichthonios. 2. The birth of a son without a mother. Erichthonius is a child born not out of love, but out of a mythical tension, rejected desire, involuntary fertility, the involuntary intervention of the earth as an adoptive mother. He has no mother in the biological sense, and Athena refuses the role of mother proper, but takes him under her protection. To protect him, Athena locks him in a wicker basket, which she entrusts to the daughters of King Cecrops with the strict order not to open it. Their curiosity leads them to ignore the prohibition, and inside the basket they discover Erichthonius, either as a child with a coiled snake, or as a human-snake hybrid. The scenes of fear drive them to madness and finally, to suicide. This story of the secret child, hidden from the world and associated with the snake, symbol of regeneration and underground mysteries, is loaded with deep meanings. 3. Athena, the symbolic mother. Although she did not give birth to him, Athena becomes the spiritual mother of Erichthonios. She raises him in her temple, teaching him the secrets of wisdom and civilization. He is one of the first heroes of Athens, and his name is closely linked to the identity of the city. Through this connection, Hephaestus becomes the involuntary father of a royal and civilizing line. Erichthonios is considered one of the first kings of Athens, founder of the religious and technological traditions of the city. Thus, the relationship between Athena and Hephaestus, although tense and unfinished, leads to the birth of a symbol of Athenian progress. Erichthonios, the child born of craft, land and thought. 4. Erichthonios, the symbol of Athenian civilization. Erichthonios is not a simple divine child. He becomes the bearer of a double heritage. From Hephaestus he inherits the creative hand, technical skill, connection with crafts and the civilizing fire. From Athena he receives wisdom, discipline, a sense of order and justice. Is a symbol of the balance between technology and reason, between the unbridled fire of desire, represented by his father, and the cold air of reason, embodied by his adoptive mother. Legends say that Erichthonios, he invented the chariot, a symbol of innovation and mobility. He introduced the cult of Athena in new forms. He was the first to tame horses in Attica. He erected the altar of the goddess and organized the Panathene festival, the cornerstone of Athenian culture. 5. Hephaestus' legacy in Erichthonios. Although the name Hephaestus is not a constant presence in the stories related to Erichthonios' reign, his influence is profound. The fact that a child born of rejection becomes the founder of a civilization is an extension of the essential theme in Hephaestus' life. The marginal becomes indispensable. Erichthonios, like his father, is unusual, mysterious, earthbound, but also a creator of order. He carries forward the theme of transforming shame into glory, of transforming an attempted aggression into the birth of a culture. In this sense, Hephaestus becomes the symbolic father of Athens, not only through Erichthonios, but also through everything he brought to the city. 6. Interpretations and symbols. The birth of Erichthonios is a story full of archetypes and metaphors. Without a mother, Erichthonios has no human or maternal origin, symbolizing the birth of civilization directly from the earth and technology, without the medium of biology. With a snake, the image of the child with a snake body reflects a connection with the underground realm, with hidden wisdom and with initiatory mysteries. protected by Athena. He is the creation of cold thought, shaped as a work of art, not as a fruit of love. Through him, mythology suggests that some forms of culture are not born of love, but of tension, of the conflict between desire and reason. 7. Conclusion. A son of the earth and the mind. Erichthonios is the point of convergence between Hephaestus and Athena, between the creative fire and pure thought. Although born in traumatic conditions, he becomes the basis of a legendary civilization. Hephaestus, through this symbolic sun, sees his fire spread in culture, in art, in technology. He becomes, indirectly, the father of a city, not through the sword, but through the spark that gives shape to the idea. Thus, Erichthonios remains not only a mythological figure, but a bridge between the marginal God and the city of supreme thought, between matter and spirit, between humility and glory. Among the gods of Olympus, each one occupies a clearly defined and spectacular role. Zeus rules with lightning, Poseidon rules the seas, Ares brings war, Athena watches over strategy, and Apollo illuminates with the rays of reason. And this universe governed by strength, perfection and greatness, Hephaestus seems, at first glance, a secondary figure, marginal in appearance and role. However, this superficial perception falls apart when we observe the essential function he fulfills. He is the architect, the craftsman, the technician of Olympus, the one who gives the gods the instruments of their power. 1. The god who does not fight, but equips. Hephaestus does not participate in celestial battles. He does not scream in war like Ares. He does not flash lightning like Zeus. He does not manipulate minds like Hermes. Instead, his underground forge gives shape to divine weapons and objects, without which the gods could not act. Among his most famous creations are the golden throne of Hera, ornamented and, at some point, transformed into a trap, the lightning bolts of Zeus, the most feared divine weapons, the spear and armor of Athena, symbols of justice and strategy, the invisible helmet of Hades, later also offered to heroes like Perseus, the shield of Achilles, a work of art and narrative masterpiece described in impressive detail in the Iliad. Thus, Hephaestus is more than a mere creator. He is the functional source of the gods' authority and power. 2. The divine functional. When the useful becomes sacred. In a divine system dominated by aesthetic excellence and brute force, Hephaestus brings a rare dimension, sacred utility. 'Tis not worshipped for his beauty, but for the indispensability of his work. Without Hephaestus, Zeus would have no weapons. Aphrodite would have no enchanted jewels. The gods would have no palaces or thrones. Mortals would have no tools, plows, or knowledge of metallurgy. In a profound sense, Hephaestus is the god who makes mythology work, is the hidden engine of the divine world, the equivalent of the anonymous craftsman behind great works. Although rarely in the spotlight, his contributions define the very material structure of Greek mythology. 3. The divine workshop, between Olympus and the depths. Myths vary regarding the location of his workshop. Some place him on Mount Olympus, in his own palace. Others, more often, place him in the depths of the earth, inside a volcano, often identified with Etna, in Sicily. This spatial ambiguity is significant. He is the Olympian god closest to earth, to materiality, to the life of mortals. His forge symbolizes the inner fire of the planet, but also the transforming fire of civilization. Like the Titan Prometheus, Hephaestus is an intermediary between heaven and earth, between gods and men. He does not raise thunderbolts, but he builds bridges between worlds. 4. Misunderstandings and divine ironies. Hephaestus' presence in Olympian mythology is often accompanied by irony. He is often underestimated, ridiculed for his deformity, treated with superiority by the goddesses of grace and gods of beauty such as Apollo or Hermes. Aphrodite, his wife, betrays him with Ares, the embodiment, his opposite. Physical strength, erotic attraction, instant brilliance. But Hephaestus responds not with force, but with invention. He creates an invisible net with which he catches the lovers in the act, exposing them to the public shame of Olympus. The scene is a lesson in functional intelligence that triumphs over superficiality. Thus, although he is not feared or revered for his charisma, Hephaestus claims his respect through cleverness and creation and a world of appearances. He is the guarantor of palpable reality. 5. The mythological function of Hephaestus. The mythological role of Hephaestus is deeper than it seems. He is the symbol of technical order in a cosmos dominated by the chaos of passions. The archetype of the silent creator, of the craftsman who does not ask for praise, but whom everyone needs. The hero of labor, in a divine system in which the other gods only command, he executes and shapes. Moreover, he is the mythical bridge to civilization. Through his crafts, he transmits to humanity not only fire, but also the art of building, of understanding matter, of transforming it. 6. Mythology and philosophy. Hephaestus as a functional logos. In late Greek philosophy, some authors saw in Hephaestus a representation of the practical logos, the reason that shapes mattered. If Athena is pure reason, and Apollo intellectual harmony, Hephaestus is applied reason, science put at the service of the world. In a way, Hephaestus is the mythological engineer, the unnoticed architect of the system, the god who does not show himself, but without whom nothing works. 7. Conclusion. An essential god in a universe that ignores Hephaestus does not have a cult as strong as Zeus or Apollo. He does not appear in heroic tragedies like Ares or Dionysus, and he does not inspire religious mysteries like Demeter or Hades. But he is the silent god without whom the world could not exist. The Olympian universe, for all its beauty and power, would be a void of forms without Hephaestus. Without his tools, thrones, weapons and temples, he is the functional, not only in the utilitarian sense, but in the profound sense, the one who gives function to things, who makes them what they are, who brings the real into the divine order and a pantheon of appearance and ideal. Hephaestus is the god of the concrete. And through this role, he becomes perhaps the most necessary of all gods. In ancient Greece, fire was more than a source of light and heat. It was a sacred element, a link between heaven and earth, between gods and men. The center of this symbolism was Hephaestus, the god of firecraft, not of the destructive flame, but of the creative, purifying and transfiguring fire. The culture of sacred fire, as reflected in sanctuaries, myths, and customs, is one of the most subtle but perennial expressions of its divine influence. 1. Fire, bridge between mortals and gods. In every important sanctuary in the Greek world, a perpetual sacred fire burned, carefully maintained by priests or priestesses. This fire was never allowed to go out, being considered a living presence of the divinity. Although the connection between fire and the goddess Hestia is most often mentioned, Hephaestus was seen as the original source of the flame, the mysterious master of the force that mortals borrowed. Thus, in theological terms, Hestia maintained fire, but Hephaestus had created it and offered it to humanity, symbolizing the beginning of material culture, of technical civilization. 2. Fire as a transfiguring force. Hephaestus' fire is not a fire that burns chaotically, as in the hands of Ares, nor one that punishes, like Zeus' lightning. He is a disciplined, domesticated, controlled fire. He melts metal, cleanses impurities, allows the transition from the crude to the refined. And the Greek vision, this type of fire had 4 fundamental dimensions. Transformation, matter changes through heat, metal becomes a tool or weapon. Purification, impurities are eliminated in the burning process, spiritual and material. Consecration, sacred fire accompanied rituals, offerings, sacrifices. Continuity, the flame was not interrupted, symbolizing the uninterrupted connection with the divine. All these functions are mythological projections of the work of Hephaestus, the craftsman of fire who does not burn to destroy, but to create. 3. Workshops as sanctuaries. In the classical era, especially in Athens, a blacksmith's workshop was perceived not only as a workspace, but as an almost sacred place, where fire was revered with respect. Each blow of the hammer was a symbolic replica of Hephaestus' work in the divine forge, and in a certain sense, each blacksmith became a small priest of the god. Especially in workshops on volcanic islands or metallurgical regions, rituals were even held in honor of Hephaestus, to bless the tools and protect the workers. 4. Fire worship in festivals. One of the most famous festivals dedicated to Hephaestus was the Hephaestia, celebrated in Athens. During this festival, ceremonial torches were lit, processions and sacrifices took place near ritual forges. The purifying power of fire was celebrated, including through the symbolic burning of impurities. Furthermore, during the Pantheon, the great craftsmen of the city were honored, an indirect celebration of their divine patron, Hephaestus. The torches and fires lit during these festivals expressed the continuity between the sacred fire in the heavens and the flame domesticated by man. 5. Parallelism with Prometheus. Fire as a civilizing gift. Although the myth of Prometheus explicitly speaks of the theft of fire to give it to humans, Hephaestus is the one who created this fire, the one who shapes it and teaches man to use it. Thus, in many variants, Hephaestus is Prometheus' silent partner, sometimes even without his will, in this civilizing act. After receiving fire, humans learn to forge tools, to build temples, to work the land. to prepare food. All these activities derive from the culture of sacred fire, as imagined under the influence of Hephaestus. 6. Initiatic symbolism. In some mystery schools, fire was considered an initiatory symbol. Passing through fire, whether literal or metaphorical, signified the purification of the soul, the hardening of character, and spiritual transformation. In this sense, Hephaestus becomes an archetype of the initiator, of the god who not only offers practical knowledge but also transfiguring experiences. Thus, in an esoteric sense, the culture of sacred fire is no longer just a ritual practice, but an inner journey, in which the flame of Hephaestus illuminates not only matter but also consciousness. 7. Fire in the city. From the temple to the agora. In Greek city-states, fire burned not only in sanctuaries, but also in the Prytaneum, the central administrative building, where the civic fire was kept. He symbolized the political continuity of the city, the divine connection with the founders, collective protection and prosperity. Although the fire of the Prytaneum was often associated with Hestia, its technical origin, the fact that it was lit and maintained by metallurgical and artisanal methods, invariably led to the thought of Hephaestus. We can say, therefore, that Hephaestus was present in the heart of the city, even if rarely mentioned directly. The culture of sacred fire in ancient Greece is, in essence, a Hephaestic culture. It honors not chaotic fire, but domesticated, creative, saving fire. Whether in temples, in homes, in workshops, or in festivals, this flame is not only physical, it is a living memory of the God who taught the world how to shape matter, but also spirit. Thus, Hephaestus is not only the god of fire, it is the one who gave meaning to fire, the one who made it a sacred tool, a bridge between the human and the divine plane, a light that still burns today in the culture of humanity. The image of Hephaestus in the art of the pantheon of ancient Greece is complex and often contrasting with other divine figures and a pantheon dominated by athletic, perfect gods, symbols of the human ideal. Hephaestus stands out for his unconventional appearance, his blacksmith's tools, and the aura of work. However, in classical art he is represented with a special dignity, as a robust, creative and rooted figure in reality. 1. Distinctive visual attributes of Hephaestus. In sculpture, painted vessels, mosaics and reliefs, Hephaestus is easily recognized by the symbols of his work. The hammer, the blacksmith's fundamental tool. The anvil, a symbol of constructive force. Pliers or other tools, marking his status as a craftsman. Worker's or blacksmith's cap, usually round, soft, similar to a Phrygian hat, a rare detail for other gods. He sometimes wears a short, simple tunic, suited to physical labor, in contrast to the elaborate garments of the other gods. These elements immediately individualize Hephaestus and anchor him in a universe closer to that of mortals than to that of the Olympian gods. 2. Representation of his physique, deformation and strength. Hephaestus is, in myth, the lame god, affected by a disability acquired at birth or following a fall from Olympus. This imperfection is often illustrated discreetly in art. He can be shown limping. Sometimes one leg appears deformed or shorter. Other times he is shown leaning on a staff or helped by a mechanical servant, in scenes from his workshops. However, artists have not insisted on the appearance of suffering or weakness. On the contrary, Hephaestus is often rendered with a muscular body, broad shoulders and strong arms, signs of his intense work. Even with his flaws, he emits an air of authority and stable power, as an archetype of the craftsman who transforms the world through toil and ingenuity. 3. Popular mythological scenes in art. Several episodes from the mythology of Hephaestus were sources of inspiration for ancient artists. Among the most represented scenes are the return of Hephaestus to Olympus. This scene was extremely popular in vase painting, especially on Attic red figure vases. Hephaestus, drunk or smiling, is led back to Olympus by Dionysus, accompanied by satyrs and maenads. It is a scene with a comic touch, but at the same time it affirms the reintegration of the marginalized god. B. The birth of Athena. In some sculptures or reliefs, Hephaestus appears with his hammer raised, hitting the head of Zeus to free Athena. It is a moment of major symbolic importance, because it emphasizes his role in the birth of divine wisdom. See Hephaestus's workshop scenes showing him in the forge, alongside his creations, from Achilles' weapons to Pandora, are frequent in Roman mosaics and in domestic decorations of the Hellenistic era. Here Hephaestus appears surrounded by tools, sometimes with automatic golden maids or assisted by Cyclops. 4. Symbolism and aesthetics. Man-god or god-man. Representations of Hephaestus in classical art contrast with the Apollonian ideal or with the warrior heroism of Ares and Heracles. Through his imperfect but vigorous physique, he becomes a symbol of work as a virtue. It is perhaps the most human of the gods, depicted as a conscientious craftsman, a creator who shapes reality with his own hands. This closeness to the world of men explains his popularity among the working classes and craftsman guilds, who often dedicated images to him in their workshops. 5. Hephaestus in Roman and post-classical art. In the Roman era, Hephaestus appears under the name Vulcan, but the visual elements remain largely the same. In mosaics from Pompeii and Herculaneum, Vulcan is often shown in his workshop, forging weapons or jewelry for gods and heroes. Interestingly, the Romans sometimes emphasized the grotesque or comical aspect of Vulcan, in contrast to the Greek sobriety. However, even in this art he remains a symbol of creative labor, a god who, although strange in form, is essential in the cosmic order. 6. Influence in Renaissance and modern art. The image of Hephaestus did not fade with antiquity and the Renaissance. Artists such as Tintoretto, Rubens or Velázquez represented him in large, often allegorical scenes. In these representations, he is shown in the forge, forging the thunderbolts of Zeus or the weapons of Achilles. He has a concentrated, meditative expression, reminiscent of creative genius. He is depicted not as an abstract divinity, but as the emblem of the enlightened craftsman, a precursor of the modern artist. In contemporary art, Hephaestus returns as a symbol of engineering, technological creation, and the value of manual labor. 7. Conclusion. The aesthetics of Hephaestus, an alternative to perfection. Hephaestus, in classical art, is not a god of beauty or war. He is, however, a god of functionality, of labor and ingenuity. Through his imperfect but dignified appearance, he reconfigures the idea of divinity, not in terms of formal perfection, but in terms of value, contribution, and creation. Thus, his image has influenced not only sculpture and painting, but also artistic thinking throughout the centuries. A god who not only shines, but builds light itself and the heart of Athens, in a city where wisdom, art, and culture coexisted with the cult of the protective gods. Hephaestus occupied a place of honor. Far from being a secondary figure, this god of fire and craftsmanship was considered essential to the life of the city. To honor his contribution to human civilization, especially in the urban and artisanal context, the Athenians organized a festival called Hephaestus. This holiday was a public celebration of sacred fire, craftsmanship, and creative fertility, understood not only as biological reproduction, but also as cultural and technological production. The festival brought together artisans, philosophers, young apprentices, and ordinary citizens in a collective manifestation of recognition of work and progress. 1. Origin and importance of the festival. The Hephaestus festival took place in Athens, most likely at regular intervals, but not annually, but once every few years, a large-scale event, which involved complex preparations. He should not be confused with the Chalk-Ia, another festival related to artisans, but in honor of Athens and Hephaestus together. Hephaestus was strictly dedicated to the god of fire and forge, consolidating his image as the patron of craftsmen and protector of urban civilization. The central place of the celebration was the temple of Hephaestus in the Athenian Agora, known today as the Hephaestion, one of the best preserved Doric temples in all of Greece. The processions and ceremonies started from there. 2. Sacred ceremonies and rites. The festival had a strong religious component, intended to restore harmony between people and the sacred fire, between the community and the creative force of the god. Among the rituals were offerings of fire and metal. Artisans brought special pieces, bracelets, tools, vessels, as symbolic gifts for Hephaestus. Lighting the sacred fire. A ceremonial fire was lit in the middle of the agora, maintained throughout the festival and considered purifying. Sacrifices and prayers. Priests brought sacrifices in the temple, praying for skill, stability, and prosperity in craft work. Through these gestures, the Athenians recognized that the material progress of the city depended on harmony with the divine fire, not just on reason or military power. 3. Craft competitions and demonstrations. One of the most spectacular components of the festival were the craft competitions. Apprentices and master craftsmen displayed their skills in front of the public and a jury consisting of guild elders, philosophers, or magistrates. These competitions included artistic blacksmithing, creating weapons or decorative objects, bronze and gold processing, fine works dedicated to the gods or for domestic use, carpentry, pottery, and small architecture. Demonstrations of innovative tools and mechanisms. Prizes consisted of olive wreaths, gold and bronze pieces, or official contracts with the city. More important, however, was the prestige. The winners became models for young apprentices and living symbols of the festival's values. 4. The playful and educational aspect. The parade of apprentices. The festival also had a festive and educational component. Young people who were initiated into the crafts were often organized in parades, carrying miniature tools or wearing clothes inspired by the iconography of Hephaestus. This parade of apprentices symbolized the continuity of tradition, the passing of knowledge from one generation to another at the same time. The festival featured theatrical skits or comic plays about the myths of Hephaestus, such as his marriage to Aphrodite, or his return to Olympus, intended to entertain the audience, but also to remind them of the humanity of the god. 5. Fertility and rebirth through fire. A lesser-known but deeply symbolic aspect of Hephaestus was the dimension of fertility. In many ancient cultures, fire was not only destructive, but also a generator of new life. The fire of Hephaestus, domesticated in the forge, became the matrix of creation, whether it was objects, cities, or ideas. During the festival, women could bring gifts of clay or fabrics, suggesting that they too, through their work, participated in material creation. Thus, Hephaestus celebrated not only male blacksmiths, but the entire creative community, in a form of urban and cultural fertility. 6. The social and political value of the festival. Hephaestus was also a subtle political instrument. By celebrating work and skill, the festival reconfirmed the role of artisans in the life of the city. In Athens, where democracy offered a certain level of participation and recognition, such events strengthened social cohesion. Also, by associating it with Athena, the goddess of wisdom and order, the festival conveyed a clear message. Civilization cannot exist without craftsmanship, without fire, without disciplined and creative work. 7. The legacy of Hephaestus. Although the festival did not survive in its original form into later times, the idea of celebrating craftsmanship and artistic work remained alive. In the Hellenistic period and then in Rome, the god Vulcan took on many of Hephaestus' traits, and similar celebrations continued in other forms. In the modern era, the Guild of Craftsmen, art workshops, and even the concepts of creative industries fairs have their spiritual roots in such ancient manifestations. Hephaestus remains, therefore, an archetype of the celebration of creative work and respect for skill. The Hephaestus festival in Athens was not only a religious commemoration, but also a cultural statement. Fire, work, creation, all were sacred. In a world where the gods were perfect, Hephaestus was a reminder that imperfection can produce miracles, that silent work sustains the world, and that innovation and tradition can coexist. In a single fire. In the Olympian pantheon, where the gods were often distinguished by their distance, whims, or pride, Hephaestus appeared as a special presence, more human than divine in many ways, and precisely for that reason closer to people. Unlike gods like Zeus or Poseidon, who who imposed their authority through force and fear, Hephaestus built his connection with mortals through gifts, work and creation. He is perhaps the only Olympian whose influence was not exercised from the sky or the sea, but directly from the workshops and homes of people. God of fire, metallurgy and inventions, Hephaestus is often perceived as a silent Prometheus, a bringer of progress, skill and hope for humanity. 1. Fire, the transforming gift. Fire, the central symbol of Hephaestus' power, was an ambivalent force. It could destroy, but above all it could transform. If Prometheus stole fire to bring it to humans, Hephaestus is the one who taught humanity how to use it, domesticating it through craft and transforming it into a civilizing tool. In mythology, he does not appear as the bringer of fire itself, but as a teacher of its use. Under his patronage, humans learned to process metals, bronze, iron, gold, to build tools, weapons, household objects, to control the forces of nature for their benefit. Thus, Hephaestus did not offer people just a flame, but a way of life based on work, knowledge, and creation. 2. God of craftsmen and guilds. For craftsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, potters, Hephaestus was more than a divinity. He was a protective figure, an almost invisible member of the guild. In Athens, especially, workshops were often located near temples dedicated to him, and festivities such as the Hephaestus consecrated his role as patron of artisanal work. Mortals did not worship him out of fear or submission, but out of gratitude. They found themselves in his image, a lame but undefeated god, lonely but creative, rejected by the gods, but loved by men in a profound way. Hephaestus reflected man's struggle with his limits, with raw material, with the hardships of life, and triumph through perseverance. 3. His inventions for humans. Although most of Hephaestus' creations are mentioned in the context of gods and heroes, myths also preserve echoes of the benefits brought to mortals. In his legendary workshops, the god is said to have created tools of daily use, plows, axes, knives, agricultural tools, decorative objects, vessels, candelabras, ornaments, defense systems, gates, walls, locks, proto-technological mechanisms, such as automatic locks or adjustable oil lamps. Also, through the indirect training of divine disciples, such as Sedalion, or through the inspiration given to mortals, he contributed to the spread of practical science in the ancient world. 4. The parable of the imperfect god. For mortals, Hephaestus offered an alternative moral model to the other gods. He was not powerful or seductive. He was not invincible in battle. He was not revered for his beauty. And yet, he was indispensable to the gods. This paradoxical force of imperfection made him a symbol of man who, despite his flaws, finds his purpose through work and creation. In a world where most divinities represent ideals that are difficult to achieve, Hephaestus allowed people to find themselves in divinity, without having to be perfect. He showed that even the rejected can become useful, that suffering can give birth to beauty. 5. protector of cities and builder of civilizations. In many myths, Hephaestus is involved in the building of cities and the construction of colossal structures, forged the shield of Achilles, but also the palaces of Olympus, the walls of Troy, or the temples of Lemnos and Athens. Thus, through the symbolic means of his works, he was seen as an architect of civilization. Every city that wanted to be civilized needed, in a mythological sense, the blessing of Hephaestus, that is, technical knowledge, architectural order, control over matter. 6. Hephaestus versus Prometheus. Although Greek mythology gives more glory to Prometheus' heroic gesture, it is Hephaestus who provides the durability of that gift. If Prometheus was the spark, Hephaestus was the hearth that maintained the flame. Without his art, fire would have dissipated needlessly. With him, it became the basis of civilization. Thus, Hephaestus is a craftsman Prometheus, less romantic, but more concrete, less defiant, but more durable. 7. Personal cult and individual prayers. Due to his proximity to everyday life, Hephaestus was invoked by mortals in simple, direct prayers. Blacksmiths prayed for the success of the forge and for safety at work. Craftsmen called on him for inspiration and precision. Young apprentices asked him for guidance and perseverance. The prayers were not accompanied by pomp, but by simple gestures, hitting the anvil, lighting a flame, or offering a beautifully crafted object. This reflects an intimate spirituality, a religion of work, in which the god was present not on a mountain, but in every workshop. Hephaestus' relationship with mortals is a bridge between the sacred and the everyday, between the divine creator and the toiling man. Unlike other gods, he did not demand blind adoration, but respect for creation and dedication to work. He did not give orders, but tools. He did not impose, but inspire. In an era when myths intertwined with daily life, Hephaestus became the god who not only ruled but worked, a model of modesty, tenacity, and utility. 4. Mortals. He was not just a god, but a companion in the daily struggle to transform matter into meaning. Chapter 5. The rivalry with Ares. At the heart of Greek mythology, amidst divine alliances and clashes of egos, lies one of the most subtle yet intense tensions between two gods essential to Hellenic civilization. Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, and Ares, the god of war. At first glance, they seem unequal. One is lame, isolated, and focused on work. The other is handsome, aggressive, and adored by armies. But deep down, the relationship between the two is a game of dependence and contrast, and their rivalry is symbolic of the struggle between brute force and technical intelligence. 1. Fundamental contrasts. Ares and Hephaestus were at the extremes of the Olympian character. Ares was the impulse, the violence, the destruction. He created nothing. He only imposed through terror and power. Hephaestus was patience, creation, construction. He brought order to the chaos generated by war. This natural opposition generated a latent tension. While Ares came to the fore on the battlefield, acclaimed for victories, Hephaestus worked in the shadows, but without him, weapons, armor, and even strategies would have been impossible. 2. Rivalry fueled by Aphrodite. Their rivalry was not only ideological, but also personal. Married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love, Hephaestus had been betrayed when she had an affair with Ares herself. The classical myth describes how, upon learning of the infidelity, Hephaestus devised an invisible and indestructible net with which he effectively trapped them, exposing them to the other gods. This public humiliation not only reinforced his contempt for Ares, but reaffirmed his supremacy in ingenuity over brute force. Ares, in turn, saw his masculine and heroic position threatened by a god he would otherwise have considered inferior. This episode has never been forgotten. 3. The invisible power of Hephaestus. Although Ares was the archetypal image of the warrior, he was, paradoxically, completely dependent on Hephaestus. Without his weapons, without his helmets, shields, spears or chariots forged deep in the mountain, Ares could not conquer, could not crush, could not exist as a mythological force. In this asymmetrical relationship, Hephaestus was the real source of power, even if he did not come to the fore. His force was not noisy, but silent and efficient. Therefore, many considered him a god with absolute power, but discreet, a power that did not need a show. 4. The symbolic battle. Destruction versus creation. Beyond marital jealousy, their rivalry reflects an archetypal battle between two poles of existence. Ares destroyed cities, families, balances. Hephaestus rebuilt tools, weapons, temples. Each war launched by Ares required a generation of labor and reconstruction guided by Hephaestus. Thus, although it seemed that war dominated, without the repair craft, history could not move forward. This rivalry thus becomes a mythological meditation on time. War is ephemeral, creation is durable. 5. Symbols of eras and civilization. In the vision of the ancient Greeks, Ares and Hephaestus represented two ways of understanding the progress of civilization. Ares was the force of conquest and expansion, a historical but uncertain engine. Hephaestus was the force of internal development, the technological, social, architectural basis of a polis. In Athens, the city of reason and art, Hephaestus was preferred to Ares. The symbolic alliance between him and Athena shows that the Greeks placed more value on construction than on conquest. 6. Revenge through creation. Hephaestus never faced Ares in battle. He had neither the body nor the nature for it. But his revenge was of a different order. With each invention, Hephaestus reaffirmed his superiority. In one myth, it is said that the blacksmith god forged a suit of armor so perfect for a mortal that even Ares would have been envious of its wearer. Here an essential lesson is born. Real power lies not in violence, but in the ability to create what even war cannot destroy. 7. Complementary, but incompatible. Although they were rivals, Ares and Hephaestus could not exist without each other. War needed tools. Craftsmanship needed conflict to prove its usefulness. But on a personal and value level, they were irreconcilable. This dynamic gives the myth a rarely seen depth. It is not just about jealousy or power, but about two visions of the world, one based on brute force and reaction, the other on work, ingenuity and construction. The rivalry between Hephaestus and Ares is not only mythological, but also a symbolic commentary on human nature. It shows us that the world is shaped not only by those who fight, but especially by those who create in an era when war seemed glorified. Myth comes to rebalance the scales, offering the blacksmith god a silent but definitive victory. Ares can win battles, but without Hephaestus, would not even have a sword to carry them with. Greek mythology, with all its splendor and symbolism, was strongly taken over and reinterpreted by the Romans, and this religious translation and culturally. The Greek god Hephaestus finds his Roman equivalent in the figure of Vulcan, the god of volcanic fire, metals, divine forges, and purifying destruction. Although he retains many of Hephaestus' original features, Vulcan becomes a divinity in the Roman pantheon with his own accents, adapted to the Latin sensibility, especially in terms of his relationship with destructive fire and the urban community. 1. The birth and identity of Vulcan. Like Hephaestus, Vulcan was associated with fire, but particularly with the devastating fire of volcanoes. The etymology of his name later influenced scientific vocabulary, the term volcano being derived from his name, which shows how deeply rooted he was in Roman thought. The Romans did not insist as much on Vulcan's physical deformity, a central detail in Greek myths. Instead, Vulcan's image is often more terrible, more imposing, reflecting both fear and respect for a force of nature that could destroy cities and crops with a single eruption. 2. Volcanal, the sanctuary in the heart of Rome. One of the oldest and most revered altars in Rome was dedicated to Vulcan. The Volcanal, located in the area of the Roman Forum. According to tradition, this altar was erected by Romulus himself, the mythical founder of Rome, which underlines the primordial importance of Vulcan in early Roman religion. Numerous fire protection rituals took place around the Volcanal. Fire, essential in the daily life of the Romans, became a divine force under Vulcan's command, which had to be tamed through offerings and ceremonies. Thus, Vulcan was not only the god of creative fire, but also the guardian of the city against uncontrolled fire. 3. Fire, creation and destruction. In Greek tradition, Hephaestus was seen almost exclusively as the creative blacksmith, the one who shapes metal and creates divine objects. In Roman mythology, Vulcan, on the other hand, acquires a dual valence. He is both creator and destroyer. This duality reflects the Roman view of fire as a vital, yet potentially disastrous, principle. In a densely urbanized Rome, fires were a constant threat. Consequently, Vulcan was feared and revered in equal measure. 4. The Vulcanalia Festival. One of the most important moments dedicated to Vulcan was the Vulcanalia, celebrated on August 23, in the middle of summer, when the risk of fires was maximum. On that day, sacrifices to the fire, live fish and other offerings, were brought to appease the god and stop him from destroying. The Vulcanalia was also a moment of symbolic purification, in which Romans sought to wash away their sins through divine fire, asking for forgiveness for mistakes and protection for the coming months. The festival emphasizes a deeply Roman theological aspect: fire as judge and purifier. 5. Vulcan and Venus. Like Hephaestus, Vulcan is considered the husband of Venus, the Roman goddess of love and beauty. Here too, the myth of betrayal is preserved. Venus deceives Vulcan with Mars, the equivalent of Ares, reiterating the same classical tension between craft and war, the intelligent and beautiful betrayed, but also the inventive power triumphing through ingenuity. And the Roman versions of the myth. The invisible net created by Vulcan reappears as a symbol of righteous deception, but also of the triumph of the mind over the body. 6. Artistic and cultural representations. In Roman art, Vulcan often appears as a mature man, with a muscular torso, hammer and anvil, depicted working in a forge, sometimes alongside his Cyclops. He is not portrayed as lame or deformed. The Romans preferred the image of the powerful blacksmith, in line with their heroic ideal. In mosaics, frescoes and sculptures, Vulcan appears alongside Ars Fabrilis, the art of craftsmanship, being a protector of metalworkers, carpenters, and even engineers. His presence in urban mythology was essential. In a civilization that valued construction, infrastructure and technology, Vulcan became an indispensable god. 7. Religious and symbolic influence. Vulcan penetrated deeply into Roman spiritual life. He was not just a distant god, but an almost practical presence. Every domestic fire, every metallurgical workshop, every furnace was considered sacred in the sense that it invoked, even without words, the presence of Vulcan. And some late sources, it is said that the priests of Vulcan watched over the safety of the city, and that during the time of Emperor Augustus, the worship of Vulcan acquired new national accents, being linked to the order and strength of Rome. 8. Hephaestus' legacy in Vulcan. Although Vulcan is a Roman adaptation, the Greek imprint of Hephaestus is omnipresent. The legend of the underground workshop, the collaboration with other gods to forge the weapons of heroes, the passion for the perfection of objects, all these elements survive in Roman mythology. But, in the Latin spirit, the emphasis shifts from the physical marginalization of the god to the imposing power of fire as a civilizing force. Hephaestus, the exiled and ironic god of Greece, becomes in Rome a pillar of social order, a guarantor of technological progress and urban protection. Hephaestus crossed the borders of Greek culture to be reborn as Vulcan, a god deeply rooted in the heart of Rome. If Hephaestus was a god of marginality who earned his place through genius, Vulcan was an integrated god, feared and revered as the life force of the eternal city. Through this metamorphosis, the myth of the god of fire and creation transcends cultures, demonstrating that craftsmanship, fire and technology are universal essences of humanity, whether in idealistic Greece or pragmatic Rome. Of all the gods of Olympus, Hephaestus is perhaps the most complex and contradictory, a living embodiment of the fundamental duality that defines human nature, beauty and ugliness. 1. Deformed, but brilliant. At birth, Hephaestus is considered deformed and undesirable, a stark contrast to the divine image of perfect beauty. Cast from heaven by Hera or Zeus, depending on the version, he suffers a permanent physical disability. But it is precisely from this fall, from this initial trauma, that his artisanal genius rises. He becomes the creator of the weapons of the gods, the forger of the symbols of divine power, proving that from imperfection artistic perfection can be born. Hephaestus embodies the idea that beauty and greatness are not found only in form, but also in function, in purpose, in the depth of the creative act. 2. Marginalized, but indispensable. Hephaestus is not fully integrated into the circle of Olympian gods. He is often treated with superiority, ignored or even ridiculed, both for his disability and for his inferior social position in the mythological hierarchy. And yet, without him, Olympus could not function. Without his tools, Zeus' lightning bolts would not exist. Without his talents, Helios' chariot, the weapons of heroes, Aphrodite's jewels or Achilles' shield would not come to life. This contradiction between exclusion and necessity defines his position. He is the god that everyone needs, but that few truly value. 3. Humiliated, but admired. Hephaestus' mythological life is strewn with humiliations. His marriage to Aphrodite becomes a symbol of divine irony. He, the deformed one, receives the most beautiful, but her betrayal by Ares exposes him to ridicule. However, Hephaestus does not fall prey to hatred or blind revenge. He responds with intelligence, with subtle irony, creating an invisible net that catches the lovers in the act of betrayal. The gesture is not brutal, but elegant and just, showing that Hephaestus' power is of a different nature, the power of intelligent creation. Despite the mockery, Hephaestus gains respect. The gods laugh at the situation, but cannot deny his skill. He is not loved for his appearance, but admired for what he creates, for his penetrating mind and his divine hands. 4. The human among the gods. What makes Hephaestus unique is his profound humanity. He suffers, is rejected, endures, creates, loves and is betrayed, a path that is more reminiscent of mortal heroes than of gods. Fundamental human traits are found in him: work, perseverance, the desire to be accepted, the ability to transform pain into art in a mythological world dominated by all-powerful and often capricious gods. Hephaestus represents effort, not privilege. He achieves nothing without creating it, without shaping it from fire and metal. This moral dimension transforms him into a symbol of the craftsman, of the creator who, although not perfect, leaves behind immortal works. 5. Creation and suffering, a deep connection. The myth of Hephaestus teaches us that true art is not born from comfort, but from turmoil and suffering. His fall from Olympus, his disability, his personal humiliations do not defeat him, but define him. These experiences make him deeper, wiser, more capable of creating absolute beauty precisely because he has known ugliness. This connection between suffering and creation brings him closer to the modern archetypes of the brilliant and tormented artist, of the misunderstood inventor, of the one who, ignored by society, nevertheless leaves an indelible mark on the world. 6. Reconciled duality. At a closer look, Hephaestus' duality is not a conflict, but a reconciliation of opposites. He does not reject his deformed side, he integrates it. He does not deny humiliation, he transforms it into glory. He does not seek brutal revenge, he creates justice through art. Thus, Hephaestus is not just an ambivalent god, he is a living lesson about self-acceptance, about transforming weakness into strength, about sublimating suffering through the creative act. This synthesis of opposites makes him a universal, archetypal symbol, valid from antiquity to the present. Hephaestus is more than a god of fire and craft, he's an image of the condition human in the divine pantheon, vulnerable, but capable of greatness. In him is found the drama and triumph of man. Therefore, he is not just a mythological character, but a profound symbolic figure, which resonates with every being who has suffered, worked, been rejected and yet created, representing a balance between extremes, beauty and disgrace, genius and suffering, marginalization and supreme utility. Hephaestus is the most human of the gods, and precisely for that reason, perhaps, the most valuable of them. Despite his marginal position in Olympian mythology, Hephaestus' legacy is profound, lasting and current. If the other gods often seem locked in a world of ideals and divine force, Hephaestus continues to live in the imagination and human culture, precisely because he speaks of universal conditions, work, suffering, creation and overcoming limitations. Hephaestus is today more than just an ancient god, he is the archetype of the craftsman, engineer, inventor and artist, a figure that resonates with the modern world and the creative human spirit. 1. The symbol of the engineer and inventor. In contemporary culture, Hephaestus is often invoked as the symbolic patron of engineering, mechanics and technology. Like him, the modern engineer works with fire, metaphorically speaking, and with metal, creating mechanisms, tools, structures and devices that change the world. His myth is evoked in the construction of robots, automation, steel forging or in the industrial arts. From modern factories to robotics laboratories, the shadow of Hephaestus stretches everywhere where innovation meets craftsmanship. 2. The inspirer of artists and creators. In addition to the engineer, Hephaestus is also an archetype of the artist, especially the sculptor, jeweler, architect or creator of forms. He not only produces useful objects, but also beautiful ones, with profound aesthetic value. His work combines functionality with elegance, precision with imagination. In this sense, Hephaestus is the unseen patron of any artist who shapes matter into ideas, who transforms raw material into objects of meaning and emotion. Each piece of art born from toil and fire seems to bear his seal. 3. The example of overcoming limitations. Perhaps Hephaestus's most valuable legacy lies in the lesson of overcoming personal limitations. The fact that he is a lame, rejected, and humiliated god who becomes indispensable through his talent conveys a universal message. It is not physical perfection, but perseverance and creativity that define an individual's worth, and a society where disability is often perceived as weakness. The myth of Hephaestus offers a powerful counter-narrative. Defect does not hinder excellence, but can even catalyze it. His suffering becomes fuel for creation. 4. The archetype of the valorous marginal. Hephaestus remains a central figure in symbolic culture also because he represents the marginalized but essential in many communities and professions. Those who work silently, behind the scenes, without visible glory, are often the ones who support the entire structure. The blacksmith, the mechanic, the craftsman, the unknown inventor, the shadow programmer, all of these are heirs to the blacksmith god. Hephaestus is the symbol of silent strength, of the hand that shapes the world without asking for applause. 5. A model of transformative creativity. What truly defines the legacy of Hephaestus is creativity as a transformative act, of raw metal into armor, of weakness into strength, of pain into beauty. This symbolic alchemy is essential in all authentic acts of creation, be they artistic, scientific or technological, and a world increasingly concerned with innovation, sustainability and responsible creation. The Hephaestian model becomes increasingly relevant. To create is to transform, shape and give new meaning to reality. 6. Hephaestus in popular culture. In comics, fantasy and science fiction films, Hephaestus often appears as an inspiration for brilliant, deformed, but savior characters. From the blacksmith in stories, to eccentric inventors or shadow heroes who build weapons, equipment and technologies. For example, characters such as Tony Stark, Iron Man, borrow from the Hephaestus archetype, people with limitations, physical or moral, but who, through intelligence and creative force, shape the world. Even the concept of artificial intelligence or conscious androids has its roots in the gods' mythical creations. Golden servants, automatons that think and move. 7. Spiritual legacy. Creation as destiny. More profoundly than anything else, Hephaestus symbolizes the vocation of creation as an existential mission. Not only the social utility of his work, but also the spiritual dimension of the creative act is essential in his legacy. To create means to contribute to the order of the world, to participate in the shaping of reality. This is a legacy that transcends myth and permeates philosophical thought, modern spirituality, and work ethics. Every man who creates, repairs, builds or models is, consciously or not, part of the Hephaestus legacy. Hephaestus is more than a forgotten god in ancient texts. He's a living metaphor for the creative man, a universal symbol of effort, perseverance and beauty born from fire and pain, and a world that is rethinking its relationship with technology, art and human limits. Hephaestus returns as an inspiring figure. The god who proved that genius can be imperfect, and perfection can be born from suffering. Epilogue. When the last echo of the hammer dies down in the depths of his workshop, Hephaestus remains, silent but present, in the matter of the world, in every creation that bears the imprint of work and imagination. He's not a god of noisy triumph, but a steadfast, profound presence of those who shape reality without seeking glory. The story of Hephaestus is, more than a simple page in Greek mythology, a lesson about the strength born of suffering and the nobility of creation. It was not physical beauty that made him immortal, nor his position among the gods, but the talent with which he transformed fire and metal into living objects, charged with meaning. A pantheon dominated by gods of war, love or wisdom, Hephaestus brought technique, the art of craftsmanship, the miracle of the hand that creates.